For most of human history, night did not arrive with warmth. When the sun disappeared, the ground slowly released its heat, and the air cooled across open landscapes where early humans lived. Fires could help, and animal skins could hold some warmth, but neither created the stable comfort that modern bedrooms provide today. The human body learned to rest in a world where sleep often began as the temperature was falling rather than rising. In modern life, we seal ourselves inside controlled warmth and assume that sleep should always feel comfortable, steady, and protected from the cold outside. Yet for the overwhelming stretch of human existence, night meant colder air, fading fires, and bodies sharing what warmth they could. If most of human history unfolded under skies that cooled after sunset, why did so much of human history sleep cold? Long before walls could seal out the night, the arrival of darkness carried a quiet physical change that shaped how humans rested. As the sun dropped below the horizon, the land that had absorbed warmth during the day slowly released that heat back into the air. Across open grasslands, forest edges, and rocky ground, the temperature did not remain steady. It gradually fell. For most animals on Earth, this nightly cooling was simply part of the environment. Early humans were no different. The first members of our species did not enter insulated rooms or adjust mechanical heat. They moved through landscapes where the difference between day and night could be felt directly on the skin. When evening settled and activity slowed, the air surrounding the body was often cooler than it had been only hours before. This quiet drop in temperature formed the background against which human sleep first emerged. In the deep past of our species, sleep did not begin in a stable indoor climate. It began in a world where warmth was fading and darkness was spreading across the land. The body that lay down to rest did so while the surrounding environment continued to cool. That pattern repeated for countless generations. Long before permanent houses or heated buildings appeared, human nights unfolded in open environments where the sun was still the main source of warmth. When its energy disappeared after sunset, the air followed. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans lived in a variety of habitats, including savannas, woodland margins, and other landscapes where daily temperature shifts were normal. Even in relatively warm regions, the transition from day to night often meant cooler ground and cooler air. The experience was not identical everywhere. Geography, season, altitude, and weather all mattered. Yet across much of the human timeline, the basic rhythm remained recognizable. Day stored heat in the land. Night slowly took it away. Humans rested inside this cycle rather than outside it. When we imagine early human sleep, it can be tempting to picture comfort similar to modern bedrooms, perhaps with simple materials but with the same sense of enclosed warmth. The archaeological and environmental records suggest something quieter and more gradual instead. Shelters may have reduced wind or provided cover, but they rarely produced a sealed indoor climate. Fires could offer warmth nearby, but their heat faded with distance and time. The result was a nighttime environment that often cooled as the hours passed. This does not mean every human night was cold in the same way. Tropical climates, humid forests, dry plains, and coastal areas all shape the experience differently. But in many of these places, the drop in temperature after sunset remained part of the nightly pattern. The human body that prepared for sleep did so while the world around it slowly shifted toward cooler conditions. This simple environmental rhythm shaped the beginning of human sleep long before technological control over temperature existed. Modern life often removes that rhythm almost entirely. Inside insulated buildings, artificial heating can keep nighttime temperatures steady regardless of what happens outdoors. Bedrooms can remain warm even when winter air freezes outside the walls. In this environment, it becomes easy to assume that comfortable sleep requires a carefully controlled temperature. Yet for most of human existence, sleep did not begin inside such stability. It began in landscapes where night meant gradual cooling. The body learned to rest while warmth slowly diminished rather than while it remained constant. This does not mean that early humans deliberately chose cold environments for sleep. It simply reflects the natural conditions under which human life developed for the majority of its history. When evening arrived across ancient landscapes, the sun no longer warmed the ground, and the air began its slow descent toward the colder hours before dawn. Within that changing environment, humans settled down to rest, sharing warmth with whatever materials, shelter, or companionship were available. The cooling night was not an unusual event. It was the ordinary backdrop of human sleep for thousands of generations. When the sun warms the surface of the earth during the day, that warmth does not disappear immediately after sunset. The ground, rocks, and vegetation slowly release the heat they have absorbed. For a short time after dusk, the air can still carry some of the day's warmth, but as darkness deepens, the stored heat continues to escape upward into the open sky. Without the sun to replace it, the temperature gradually falls. This simple physical process has shaped the nights of this planet long before human beings appeared. Early humans lived entirely inside this cycle. Their bodies rested not in controlled rooms but in landscapes that followed the same pattern night after night. Warmth fading, air cooling, and the ground slowly giving back the heat it had held through the day. Because this cooling happened gradually, it was not always experienced as a sudden shock of cold. Instead, it unfolded slowly over hours. A person settling down to sleep might first feel the lingering warmth of the day on the ground beneath them. As the night moved forward, that warmth would weaken. The air around the body would become cooler, sometimes only slightly, sometimes more noticeably depending on the season or the weather. The change was steady rather than abrupt. Over thousands of generations, this nightly rhythm became part of the environmental background in which human sleep occurred. The first humans did not invent sleep in stable temperatures. They slept while the surrounding world was slowly shifting from the heat of day toward the cooler conditions before dawn. This cooling of the land after sunset is especially strong in open landscapes where heat can escape freely into the sky. Many of the environments associated with early human history, including wide grasslands and lightly wooded areas, allow heat to radiate away efficiently at night. Without thick clouds or dense canopy to trap warmth, the temperature of the air can drop more noticeably as the night progresses. Early humans often lived in places where the sky was visible above them, and where the land itself was exposed to these nightly changes. Even when people used natural shelters such as rock overhangs or shallow caves, the surrounding air still followed the same larger rhythm of cooling. Shelter could soften wind or reduce exposure, but it rarely created a completely separate climate from the outside world. As the night grew deeper, the difference between day and night temperatures could be felt more clearly on the skin. The human body resting in such environments experienced not only darkness but also the slow decline of warmth that came with it. In the modern world, it is common to move from the heat of day directly into an indoor environment where the temperature remains nearly unchanged for hours. A heated or air-conditioned room can hold a narrow range of temperature through the entire night. This stability can give the impression that human sleep naturally belongs inside such conditions. Yet, for most of the long history of our species, the surrounding environment never remained perfectly steady from evening until morning. Instead, the hours of sleep were part of the same natural thermal cycle that shaped the rest of the day. The body lay down while the land cooled and often woke again near the coldest moment of the night, just before sunrise began warming the ground once more. The experience of sleeping in a gradually cooling world therefore became deeply familiar across generations. It was not a rare hardship or an unusual event, but an ordinary feature of the natural environment in which human life unfolded. People adjusted through posture, shared warmth, small fires, coverings, and the simple habit of resting during the darkest hours when activity slowed. The landscape itself provided the framework. Day stored warmth, night slowly released it. Within that repeating rhythm, humans slept for most of their history. The quiet descent of temperature after sunset formed the physical background of countless human nights long before buildings could hold the warmth of the day inside their walls. Over very long stretches of human time, the pattern of warmth during the day and cooling during the night did not happen once or twice. It repeated across generations so many times that it became an almost invisible background to life. The early members of our species were born into landscapes where evening carried the quiet signal that the warmth of the sun was leaving the ground. As darkness expanded across the horizon, the air gradually shifted. Activities slowed, visibility declined, and the temperature of the surrounding environment moved gently downward. In such a world, preparing for sleep meant settling into a moment when the land was no longer gaining heat but slowly giving it away. This did not require people to think consciously about temperature every night. The change was simply part of the natural transition from day to night. Yet over thousands of years, that repeated experience shaped the circumstances under which human sleep took place. Instead of beginning rest inside a controlled indoor climate, humans rested within a cooling landscape that followed the same physical rhythm everywhere the sun set. Across the deep history of our species, humans lived in many climates, from warmer regions closer to the equator to cooler areas further from it. Even within these differences, the transition from sunlight to darkness often carried the same general movement of temperature. The ground that had absorbed energy during the day gradually released it upward once the sun disappeared. In open environments, this release could continue for hours, meaning that the coldest moment of the night often arrived just before sunrise rather than immediately after sunset. People who lay down to rest in the evening were therefore entering a period when the surrounding air would slowly become cooler as the night progressed. Their sleep unfolded inside this descending curve of temperature. The experience varied with weather, season, and geography, but the underlying physical cycle remained consistent enough to shape countless nights of human rest. For the majority of human history, there were few ways to separate the sleeping body completely from this environmental rhythm. Shelters could reduce wind or provide protection from rain, and fires could offer warmth nearby. Yet neither of these solutions eliminated the wider movement of nighttime cooling. The air beyond the immediate reach of a flame continued to lose heat, and the ground beneath the body gradually cooled as well. The result was a sleeping environment that often remained connected to the broader climate of the night. This connection did not necessarily mean extreme cold in every place or season. Many nights in human history were likely mild, especially in warmer regions. Yet even mild nights followed the same pattern. The temperature moved downward rather than remaining fixed. Over generations, people adapted their habits to this rhythm. They might gather close to one another, arrange materials beneath and above the body, or maintain small fires that softened the chill of the air. These practices did not remove the cooling of the night. They worked alongside it. When we look back across the long timeline of our species, it becomes clear that the environment surrounding human sleep was rarely as stable as the bedrooms many people know today. The steady indoor warmth that modern technology provides is a relatively recent development when measured against the hundreds of thousands of years during which humans lived without it. For most of that time, the body that prepared for sleep did so in a world where darkness brought not only the absence of sunlight, but also the gradual loss of warmth from the land itself. Night after night, generation after generation, humans lay down while the air cooled around them. The quiet descent of temperature was not an unusual hardship, but a natural companion of darkness, shaping the background conditions in which human sleep first developed. For most of human history, the places where people slept did not fully separate them from the surrounding night. Long before houses with sealed walls and insulated roofs became common, humans rested in spaces that allowed the outside environment to remain present. These places could include natural shelters such as rock overhangs, shallow caves, clusters of vegetation, or simple structures built from branches, leaves, and animal skins. Each of these forms of shelter provided some protection from wind, rain, or direct exposure to the open sky. Yet they rarely created a closed indoor climate like the rooms familiar in modern life. The air within these shelters often remained connected to the air outside them, and the gradual cooling of the night could still be felt by the bodies resting inside. When evening arrived and the sun's warmth began to fade from the landscape, the temperature change moved through these shelters much as it did across the surrounding land. The boundary between inside and outside was soft rather than absolute. This kind of shelter reflected the mobility that characterized much of early human life. Many communities moved through landscapes in search of food, water, and seasonal resources. Because of this movement, the structures people used for rest were often temporary or easily assembled rather than permanent buildings designed to hold heat. Materials such as wood, grasses, leaves, and animal skins could create shade during the day and offer some cover at night, but they did not trap warmth the way thick walls or layered insulation can today. The result was a sleeping environment where the body remained partly exposed to the broader climate. The warmth of the day might linger briefly in the ground or the air, yet as the hours passed and the land released its stored heat, the cooler night gradually entered the spaces where people rested. Archaeological research offers clues about these early shelters, though the evidence is often subtle because organic materials decay over time. Stone tools, hearth remains, and the arrangement of living areas sometimes suggest where people gathered and slept. but the lightweight structures that once covered these spaces rarely survive intact. Even so, the general picture that emerges from many sites is one of flexible living areas rather than sealed buildings. People used the materials available around them to create protections suited to their environment, but these protections usually softened the effects of weather instead of isolating the body from it completely. A rock overhang might block wind from one direction while still allowing cool air to circulate. A shelter made from branches and skins could reduce exposure to rain while leaving small openings where air continued to move. The night remained present within these spaces rather than being fully shut out. In the modern world, architecture often aims to control temperature by limiting the exchange between indoor and outdoor air. Walls, windows, and insulation work together to create a stable climate that can remain warm even when the outside environment becomes cold. This design reflects technological developments that appeared relatively late in the long history of our species. For the majority of that history, human sleep occurred in places where the boundary between shelter and landscape remained permeable. As the night cooled the surrounding environment, the change could still be felt by the people resting inside. The shelters offered protection and comfort compared with sleeping directly under the open sky, but they did not transform the night into a sealed and consistently warm space. Instead, they formed a middle ground between exposure and protection. Within these environments, humans lay down to rest while the broader landscape continued its gradual descent into the cooler hours before dawn. As human groups moved through landscapes in search of food, water, and seasonal resources, the places where they slept often changed as well. Unlike the fixed houses familiar in modern towns and cities, many early shelters were temporary solutions shaped by the materials available nearby. Branches, grasses, animal skins, and flexible wooden frames could be assembled into coverings that offered shade during the day and some protection during the night. These structures could be built quickly and adjusted as people moved from one place to another. Yet because they were made from natural materials and designed for mobility, they rarely formed airtight spaces. Small gaps remained between branches or along the edges of skins, and these openings allowed the surrounding air to circulate. When the night cooled the landscape outside, that cooler air could still move through the shelter. The body resting within it therefore remained connected to the broader environment rather than isolated from it. This connection between shelter and landscape reflected the practical needs of early human life. Mobility meant that structures had to be light, flexible, and easy to construct with what the land provided. Thick walls of stone or packed earth required time, labor, and long-term settlement. Such buildings became more common only much later in human history, when agriculture and permanent villages began to anchor communities to specific locations. Before that shift, the sleeping spaces of many human groups resembled protective coverings rather than enclosed rooms. These coverings could reduce exposure to rain or wind and create a sense of shared space. Yet they did not hold the warmth of the day in the way insulated houses do today. The temperature within them often followed the same gradual pattern as the surrounding night. Archaeological sites sometimes preserve indirect traces of these living arrangements. Hearths reveal where fires once burned, and clusters of tools or food remains can suggest areas where people gathered or rested. But the shelters themselves, made largely from organic materials, rarely survive across long spans of time. Because of this, much of what we understand about early sleeping spaces comes from a combination of archaeological clues, environmental studies, and observations of traditional shelters used in various parts of the world. These sources together suggest that early human shelters functioned primarily as protection from weather and animals rather than as systems designed to regulate temperature precisely. When evening approached and the air began to cool, the shelter might soften the wind or hold a small pocket of warmth near a fire, but it could not fully prevent the broader environmental change taking place outside. The experience of resting inside such a structure therefore differed from modern indoor life in a subtle but important way. The body could still sense the passage of night through changes in air temperature and movement. As the hours passed and the land continued to release the heat stored during the day, the shelter gradually cooled along with it. People sleeping within these spaces might rely on coverings, shared warmth, or proximity to a fire to remain comfortable. Yet the surrounding environment remained part of the experience. The shelter acted as a buffer rather than a barrier. In modern buildings, architecture often aims to separate indoor life from outdoor climate. Heating systems, insulation, and sealed windows allow a room to maintain a nearly constant temperature regardless of conditions outside. For most of human history, however, the structures in which people slept were far less isolated from the environment. They provided security and modest comfort, while still allowing the rhythms of the natural night to enter. As darkness deepened and the air cooled across the landscape, those changes gradually reached the sleeping spaces of human communities. Within shelters made from the materials of the land itself, people rested while the night slowly carried away the warmth of the day. Even when people found more solid forms of shelter in the landscape, the night rarely remained outside. Natural places such as shallow caves, rock overhangs, and protected cliff edges offered advantages that simple structures made from branches could not provide. Stone could block strong winds, reduce exposure to rain, and create a more stable place to gather, cook, and rest. Because of these qualities, such locations appear repeatedly in archaeological records connected to early human activity. Yet these shelters did not function like modern buildings. Most caves and rock shelters are open on one side, allowing air to move freely between the interior space and the surrounding environment. The temperature inside them often reflects the outside conditions, only softened slightly by the mass of stone around them. When evening arrives and the outside air begins to cool, the interior space gradually follows the same shift. The rock may slow the change, but it does not stop it. For people resting in these places, the cooling night still formed part of the experience of sleep. The interior of a cave or rock shelter could feel more stable than the open ground nearby, especially if the space blocked wind or held the warmth of a nearby fire. Yet this stability was relative rather than absolute. The air still circulated through the entrance, carrying the changing temperature of the night with it. In some environments, cooler air from the outside might even drift inward as the night deepened, moving gently through the shelter. The people who rested in these spaces were therefore protected from certain elements, but not separated entirely from the climate around them. The stone overhead offered security and cover, but it did not create the sealed indoor warmth that modern architecture can provide. This distinction is important when imagining how human sleep unfolded across long stretches of time. Shelters such as caves provided real advantages. They could protect against predators, shield the body from rain, and create a place where firelight could extend the usable hours of evening. These benefits made them valuable gathering points for many human groups. Yet even in such locations, the environment of night remained present. The warmth of a fire reached only a limited distance, and the temperature of the surrounding air continued to follow the natural cooling pattern after sunset. A person resting near the entrance of a rock shelter might still feel the slow drop in temperature as the hours passed. Those deeper inside might experience a slightly steadier environment, but the difference was one of degree rather than complete separation. Over generations, humans used these natural shelters where they existed, adapting their sleeping arrangements to the spaces available in each landscape. Some people slept close to fires, others arranged materials on the ground to reduce contact with the cooling surface of the earth. Groups often gathered together for safety and warmth. Each of these practices helped soften the effects of nighttime cooling without eliminating it entirely. The surrounding environment remained part of the sleeping world. When we compare this with modern life, the difference becomes easier to see. Today, a bedroom can remain warm and nearly unchanged from evening until morning, even if the outside temperature drops sharply. Walls, insulation, and heating systems isolate the interior from the natural cycle of heat and cooling. In the deeper past of human history, such separation rarely existed. Whether resting under a simple shelter, beneath a canopy of vegetation, or within the partial cover of stone, people remained connected to the wider landscape around them. The arrival of darkness still carried the same quiet transformation, the warmth of the day slowly leaving the ground, and the air growing cooler through the night. Within these permeable shelters, humans slept while that transformation unfolded around them, sharing their rest with the gradual cooling that accompanied the long hours before dawn. Long before walls could trap warmth or heating systems could hold a steady temperature through the night, humans discovered something that changed their relationship with darkness: fire. The controlled use of fire appears in archaeological evidence far back in the human timeline, associated with hearths, burned materials, and repeated signs of flames maintained in particular places. Fire extended the usable hours of evening by providing light, and it helped protect sleeping areas from certain animals that avoided its glow and smell. Most importantly for the human body, fire produced warmth in environments where the surrounding air cooled after sunset. Yet, this warmth did not transform the night into a uniformly heated space. A fire created a small center of heat that gradually weakened as distance increased. Close to the flames, the air could feel noticeably warmer. A short distance away, the difference became smaller. Beyond that circle, the cooling air of the night remained largely unchanged. Early human sleep often unfolded within this uneven landscape of warmth and cooler air. A fire could soften the cold nearby, but it did not replace the broader environmental rhythm that continued across the surrounding land. The warmth from a fire was also temporary and required attention. Flames needed fuel in the form of wood, dried plant material, or other combustible resources gathered from the environment. As the fire consumed these materials, its strength changed. Bright flames might give way to glowing embers, and the heat produced by those embers would gradually diminish unless new fuel was added. Maintaining a steady fire through the night demanded effort and awareness. In many situations, fires likely burned more strongly during the early evening, when people were still awake and active around them. As sleep settled across the group, the flames could grow smaller unless someone remained awake to feed the fire. This meant that the warmth available during the first part of the night might not remain exactly the same hours later. The circle of heat slowly shifted as the fire itself changed. For the people resting nearby, this created a sleeping environment that was warmer than the open night, but still influenced by the gradual cooling of the surrounding air. Archaeological sites often reveal traces of these ancient hearths. Layers of ash, charcoal fragments, and stones arranged around fire pits suggest places where flames burned repeatedly over long periods of time. These hearths sometimes appear near areas interpreted as living or sleeping spaces, indicating that fire formed an important center of human activity after sunset. The presence of hearths shows that people intentionally used fire to shape their nighttime environment. Yet the evidence also reminds us that these fires existed within open or lightly sheltered spaces rather than inside tightly sealed buildings. The heat they produced spread outward into the surrounding air, gradually mixing with the cooler atmosphere of the night. Fire, therefore, changed the human experience of darkness without fully removing the environmental conditions that accompanied it. The warmth it provided could make a significant difference for those sitting or resting nearby, especially in cooler climates or seasons. It allowed people to gather, prepare food, and remain awake after sunset. At the same time, the reach of that warmth remained limited. A fire could create comfort within a small circle, but it did not turn the entire landscape into a heated room. When people lay down to sleep near these hearths, their bodies rested in a patchwork of temperatures shaped by distance from the flames, the strength of the fire, the movement of air, and the natural cooling of the land. In this way, fire became an important companion to human sleep without replacing the larger nighttime rhythm of temperature change. It softened the cold rather than eliminating it, allowing warmth to exist within a world that still cooled steadily after the sun disappeared beyond the horizon. The warmth produced by a fire spreads outward in a way that is both familiar and limited. Anyone who has sat beside a flame knows that the heat is strongest near the source and fades quickly with distance. A person sitting very close to a fire may feel a strong warmth on the side of the body facing the flames, while the air behind them remains noticeably cooler. This uneven pattern is not a modern observation. It reflects the basic physics of heat moving through air. Early humans who gathered around fires at night experienced the same pattern. The fire created a small center of warmth surrounded by cooler air that remained part of the natural night. Even when people arranged themselves carefully around a hearth, the environment rarely became evenly warm in every direction. Those nearest the fire felt the greatest warmth, while those further away experienced less of its effect. The ground beyond the immediate reach of the flames continued to cool as the night progressed. This meant that sleeping near a fire often involved subtle adjustments. People might shift their position slightly closer or farther from the heat, turn one side of the body toward the flames, or draw coverings around themselves to hold the warmth for longer. These small movements formed part of the nightly rhythm of resting near a hearth. The strength of a fire also changed over time. Flames burn brightly when fresh fuel is added, but as the wood or plant material is consumed, the fire gradually settles into glowing embers. Embers can continue to release heat for long periods, yet their warmth spreads more gently than the sharp heat of open flames. Over the course of a night, a fire could move through several stages. Bright flames during the evening, slower glowing heat in the middle hours, and perhaps only faint warmth by the time dawn approached. Unless someone woke to add more fuel, the circle of warmth slowly shrank. The people resting nearby therefore slept in an environment where the warmth of the fire gradually changed while the surrounding air continued to cool. Their experience of the night was shaped by the combined influence of these two processes, the fading heat of the fire and the natural loss of warmth from the land after sunset. Archaeological findings often show that hearths were central points within ancient living areas. Stones arranged around fire pits sometimes form rings that help contain burning materials and reflect some heat toward the center. These arrangements suggest that people understood how to make the most of the warmth available. Sitting or resting around a hearth allowed the group to share a limited source of heat while also maintaining light and protection during the darker hours. Yet even with such arrangements, the reach of warmth remained modest compared with the controlled heating systems of modern buildings. The open nature of many early living spaces meant that air could still circulate freely around the fire. Wind, gaps in shelter walls, and the open sky above could all influence how heat spread and how quickly it faded. In such settings, warmth existed as a local phenomenon rather than a stable climate. A fire did not create a fully enclosed indoor temperature. It produced a living center of heat surrounded by the cooler air of the night. When people eventually lay down to rest near these hearths, their bodies remained within that mixed environment. One side of the body might feel the lingering warmth of embers, while the surrounding air continued its slow descent toward the coldest hours before dawn. The presence of fire therefore changed the night in an important but incomplete way. It provided warmth that could be shared and managed, yet it never fully separated human sleep from the broader cooling world beyond the flames. As night deepened and human groups gradually settled into rest, the fire that had once been the center of evening activity continued to change. During the early hours after sunset, flames might burn more brightly as people gathered around them. Wood was added, sparks lifted into the dark air, and the warmth extended outward across the nearby ground. This period of stronger heat often coincided with the time when people were still awake, preparing food, speaking quietly, or watching the fire's movement in the darkness. But as the group began to sleep, the fire was less frequently tended. Without fresh fuel, the flames slowly lowered. The wood collapsed inward, and the bright light of the fire gradually softened into a bed of glowing embers. These embers could continue releasing heat for a long time, yet the character of that warmth was different. Instead of the active heat of flames, the warmth became slower and gentler, spreading only a short distance through the surrounding air. The circle of warmth that once surrounded the fire gradually became smaller as the night progressed. For those resting nearby, this change was part of the natural pattern of sleeping beside a hearth. At the beginning of the night, the body might feel the stronger warmth of burning wood. Later, as the embers cooled and the surrounding landscape continued losing the heat of the day, the air around the sleeping group could feel noticeably cooler. The fire did not disappear entirely, but its influence became more subtle as the hours passed. In many environments, the coldest moment of the night often arrives just before sunrise, when the ground has spent hours releasing heat into the sky without the sun replacing it. By that time, a fire left untended for many hours might be glowing only faintly. The warmth available to sleeping bodies therefore depended not only on the existence of fire but also on its changing intensity through the night. This meant that fire softened the cold of night without removing the broader environmental pattern that shaped human sleep. Archaeological evidence from ancient hearths sometimes shows layers of ash and charcoal that accumulated from repeated fires in the same location. These traces suggest that people returned to certain places again and again, building new fires where earlier ones had burned. The repeated presence of hearths indicates how central fire became to nighttime life. It provided warmth, light, and a place where the group could gather together in the dark. Yet the physical limits of fire remained clear. Even when people carefully arranged stones around a hearth or placed sleeping areas nearby, the warmth extended only so far before blending into the cooler air of the surrounding environment. The night outside the fire's reach continued its steady descent in temperature. Over time, humans learned many ways to work with this limited warmth. They could place sleeping areas closer to the hearth, position their bodies to capture heat, or maintain fires in ways that prolong the life of embers. But these methods did not transform the landscape into a continuously heated space. Instead, they allowed warmth to exist temporarily within a cooling world. The fire became a center of life after sunset, yet it remained a small island of heat in a much larger environment, governed by the loss of the sun's energy. For most of human history, sleep took place near these islands of warmth rather than inside structures that held heat throughout the entire night. The body resting beside a hearth, therefore, experienced both the comfort of fire and the quiet presence of the cooling night beyond it. When people imagine the cold of night, they often think first of the air. Wind, open sky, and falling temperatures seem like the most obvious sources of chill. Yet for a body lying down to sleep, the ground beneath it can play an equally important role. The surface of the earth does not hold the warmth of the day forever. As darkness settles across the landscape, the soil, rock, and sand that absorbed sunlight begin releasing that stored heat back into the atmosphere. This slow loss of warmth means that the ground itself gradually becomes cooler through the night. For humans resting directly on or near that surface, the body does not only encounter cooler air above, but also a cooler layer below. Heat naturally flows from warmer objects to cooler ones. When a warm human body lies against ground that is losing heat, some of the body's warmth moves downward into that surface. Over time, this transfer can make the sleeping body feel cooler even when the air temperature is not extremely low. In the long history of our species, many sleeping places brought the body into close contact with the earth. Early humans did not typically rest on thick raised beds separated from the ground by insulating layers of wood, springs, and padding. Instead, people often slept on the land itself or on simple materials gathered from the environment and placed on top of it. These materials could include grasses, leaves, animal skins, or other organic coverings that softened the surface and added some protection against moisture and insects. Such layers helped improve comfort and could slow the transfer of heat between body and ground. Yet they were rarely thick enough to isolate the sleeper completely from the cooling earth beneath. The temperature of the ground still influenced the body through the night. As the hours passed and the land continued to release the heat stored during the day, the surface beneath the sleeper gradually cooled along with the surrounding environment. This relationship between the human body and the ground becomes clearer when we consider how the earth behaves after sunset. During daylight hours, sunlight warms the upper layer of soil and rock. Once the sun disappears, that warmth begins escaping into the air and toward the open sky. Without incoming solar energy to replace it, the ground steadily loses heat. In open landscapes especially, this process can continue through much of the night. By the time the darkest hours arrive, the ground may feel noticeably cooler than it did earlier in the evening. For someone resting close to that surface, the cooling ground becomes part of the nighttime environment just as much as the cooling air above. This meant that early human sleep unfolded within a vertical exchange of warmth, the body releasing heat downward to the earth, while also encountering cooler air moving across the skin. Humans responded to this challenge with practical solutions drawn from the surrounding landscape. Materials placed between the body and the earth created a buffer that slowed the movement of heat. A layer of dried grass or leaves could trap small pockets of air that reduced direct contact with the soil. Animal skins provided another useful barrier, especially when several layers were arranged together. These methods did not eliminate the cooling of the ground, but they helped the body retain warmth longer through the night. Even so, the sleeper remained connected to the larger environmental cycle. The ground beneath continued its slow release of the day's warmth while the night air cooled above. For most of human history, the body resting in darkness was positioned between these two changes, lying close to a surface that was gradually losing heat. The earth itself, therefore, became part of the story of why human nights often felt cooler as sleep unfolded across the long hours before sunrise. Even a thin layer between the body and the earth can make a noticeable difference during the night. When early humans prepared a place to sleep, they often gathered materials from the surrounding environment and arranged them on the ground before lying down. Dried grasses, leaves, branches, and animal skins could be placed together to form a softer surface. These materials were not only about comfort, they also helped slow the movement of heat between the body and the cooler ground beneath. Air trapped inside plant fibers or between layers of skins created a small insulating space. Because still air transfers heat more slowly than solid surfaces, These layers allowed the warmth of the body to remain closer to the sleeper for longer. Yet the insulation they provided was modest compared with modern bedding. The materials were often uneven, limited in thickness, and shaped by what the landscape could provide at the moment. Over the course of the night, the cooling of the earth continued, and some of that change could still be felt through the layers placed above it. The effectiveness of these natural sleeping surfaces depended on how they were arranged and how much material was available. In environments where grasses or leaves were plentiful, people could build thicker layers that lifted the body slightly away from the ground. In other landscapes where such materials were scarce, the barrier between the sleeper and the earth might be thinner. Animal skins offered additional protection, especially when folded or layered, but these too were shaped by availability and by the needs of daily life. Skins might serve as clothing, coverings, or portable materials that moved with a group as it traveled. The same skin that helped keep a person warm during sleep might be used during the day for carrying objects or protecting against weather. Because of this shared use, the sleeping surface often reflected practical choices rather than permanent bedding designed only for nighttime comfort. The result was a resting place that softened the contact with the earth without fully separating the body from it. As darkness deepened and the ground continued losing heat, the sleeper remained aware of that slow change through the surface beneath them. In many parts of the world, the earth cools more quickly on clear nights when heat can escape easily into the open sky. Under these conditions, the surface temperature of soil or rock may drop steadily over several hours. A person lying close to that surface can experience this shift through the gradual transfer of warmth from body to ground. Even when air temperatures remain moderate, the contact with a cooling surface can influence how warm or cool the body feels during rest. For early humans who slept directly on or near the earth, this interaction with the ground formed a quiet but consistent part of nighttime life. People responded by arranging their sleeping materials carefully. Layers of grass might be spread out to create a thicker cushion. Branches could lift the body slightly above damp soil. Skins could be folded to protect the areas of the body most exposed to the ground. These choices helped manage the transfer of heat without eliminating it entirely. The sleeper remained connected to the landscape through the surface beneath them. While the air above cooled with the passing hours of night, the ground below continued its slow release of the warmth stored during the day. Between these two processes, the cooling air and the cooling earth, the human body rested in a narrow band of warmth shaped partly by natural insulation and partly by the body's own heat. Over generations, these simple arrangements became part of the practical knowledge of sleeping in natural environments. They allowed people to remain comfortable enough to rest, while still living within the larger environmental rhythm that governed temperature from sunset to sunrise. As the hours of night continued, the relationship between the body and the ground became part of a quiet balance of warmth. A sleeping human body constantly produces heat through the normal processes that keep it alive. That warmth slowly spreads outward from the skin into the surrounding environment. Some of it moves upward into the air, and some of it moves downward into whatever surface supports the body. When the surface beneath is cooler, the transfer of heat becomes more noticeable. The ground receives a portion of the warmth that the body releases. Over time, this exchange can make the surface directly beneath a sleeper feel slightly warmer, but the wider ground around it continues losing heat into the night sky. Because the earth is vast compared with the warmth of a single body, the cooling process of the ground generally continues throughout the night. The sleeper, therefore, rests in a small pocket of warmth surrounded by surfaces that are gradually becoming cooler. This interaction explains why the way people arranged their sleeping places mattered so much. Even small differences in height or material could influence how heat moved between body and earth. When people placed branches or bundles of plant material beneath their sleeping surface, they created small gaps filled with still air. These pockets of air slowed the transfer of heat from the body to the ground below. The body's warmth remained closer to the sleeper for longer, allowing rest to continue more comfortably through the darker hours. Yet these arrangements rarely removed the effect of the earth completely. As the night progressed and the ground continued releasing the warmth stored during the day, the cooling environment gradually surrounded the sleeper from below as well as above. The experience of sleeping close to the earth therefore remained connected to the larger rhythm of the landscape. Early humans adapted to this reality with a combination of practical choices and shared habits. Sleeping surfaces were often arranged with care when possible, using whatever materials were available nearby. Groups might choose slightly raised areas where water drained more easily and where the ground remained drier and more comfortable. Dry soil, sand, or leaf-covered ground could feel less cold than damp earth that conducted heat more quickly. The presence of a nearby fire could also influence where people rested, because the warmth from embers sometimes reached the ground around the hearth. Even so, the effect remained limited in distance. A sleeping area a short distance away from the fire might receive only a gentle trace of that warmth. Beyond that small circle, the earth continued its steady cooling beneath the night sky. Through many generations of human life, the body therefore rested close to a surface that followed the same cycle as the air above it. Daylight warmed the land. Darkness slowly removed that warmth. The sleeper lay between these two movements, losing heat both upward and downward while relying on coverings, companions, and simple insulation to remain comfortable enough to sleep. Modern bedrooms change this relationship dramatically. Raised beds, thick mattresses, and insulated floors create layers that almost completely separate the body from the cooling ground. Heating systems further reduce the effect by keeping indoor surfaces warm through the night. In earlier human environments, such separation was rare. The body remained close to the earth that had supported human life for thousands of generations. As darkness deepened and the warmth of the day faded from the land, the ground beneath the sleeper quietly joined the air above in becoming cooler. Human sleep unfolded between those two slow changes, resting on a surface that was gradually returning its stored warmth to the vast sky above. Human sleep is closely tied to the internal rhythms of the body, and one of the most important of these rhythms involves temperature. Across the course of a day, the human body does not remain at exactly the same internal warmth. Instead, it follows a gentle cycle that rises and falls in connection with activity, light, and rest. During the day, when movement and alertness are highest, the body tends to maintain slightly higher internal warmth. As evening approaches and the body prepares for sleep, internal temperature begins to decrease gradually. This quiet shift is part of the biological timing system that helps signal the transition from wakefulness to rest. The lowering of body temperature does not mean the body becomes cold. Rather, it reflects a controlled change that accompanies the onset of sleep. When people settle into rest, the body releases heat more easily through the skin, allowing internal temperature to drift slightly downward during the early stages of sleep. This natural process developed long before humans had the ability to regulate the temperature of their surroundings with buildings or technology. For most of the history of our species, the environment in which people slept cooled at roughly the same time that the body itself was beginning its nightly reduction in internal warmth. The falling temperature of the night and the internal rhythms of the body therefore moved in similar directions. As darkness spread across the landscape and the air gradually cooled, the body was also entering a state in which it released some of its stored warmth. This parallel movement did not eliminate the challenges of sleeping in cooler environments, but it meant that the body's internal rhythms were not completely at odds with the cooling world outside. Instead, the body's preparation for sleep unfolded within an environment where warmth was already fading after sunset. In the absence of insulated shelters or stable indoor climates, this alignment between internal and external temperature changes may have influenced how humans rested across long stretches of time. The biological rhythm of decreasing warmth in the evening was not created in modern bedrooms. It emerged in landscapes where nights naturally cooled. The human body also has ways to adjust how heat moves across the skin while resting. Blood flow near the surface of the body can increase or decrease depending on the surrounding environment, allowing warmth to spread outward or remain closer to the core. During the early stages of sleep, blood vessels near the skin often widen slightly, which helps release heat and supports the drop in internal temperature associated with falling asleep. In environments where the air becomes cooler at night, this release of warmth can be felt as the skin interacts with the surrounding air. If the environment becomes too cold, however, the body can respond by narrowing these blood vessels again, helping to preserve warmth near vital organs. These adjustments are part of the body's ongoing effort to balance internal stability with external conditions. For early humans sleeping in environments shaped by natural temperature cycles, these responses formed part of the nightly experience of rest. The body's biological clock signaled the transition towards sleep, while the surrounding landscape slowly cooled after sunset. In this way, the internal rhythms of the human body developed in a world where warmth was rarely constant through the night. Instead of resting inside perfectly stable temperatures, early human sleep unfolded within a dynamic relationship between body and environment. The body gradually released heat as sleep began, while the surrounding air and ground were also moving toward cooler conditions. This shared rhythm between biological processes and the natural cooling of night formed part of the background in which human sleep evolved across the long timeline of our species. As sleep deepens during the night, the human body continues to follow its internal rhythm of temperature change. After the gradual decrease that begins in the evening, internal warmth tends to reach its lowest point during the later hours of the night, often not long before sunrise. This cycle repeats each day as part of the body's broader biological timing system. The exact timing can vary from person to person, yet the overall pattern is widely observed: a gentle decline in internal temperature after nightfall, followed by a slow rise again as morning approaches. In the deep history of our species, this internal rhythm unfolded in landscapes where the surrounding environment was moving through a similar sequence. After sunset, the land and air gradually cooled, and the lowest temperatures of the night often appeared near the early hours before dawn. In this way, the body's internal cycle of warmth and the external cycle of the environment frequently overlapped. Both were descending during the night and beginning to turn upward again when daylight returned. This alignment does not mean that sleeping in natural environments was always comfortable or easy. The body still required protection from excessive cold, and humans relied on coverings, shared warmth, and fire when possible. Yet the biological timing of sleep was not completely separate from the conditions of the night. Instead, the body's rhythms developed within that environmental pattern across many generations. When the body begins preparing for sleep, several subtle processes contribute to the shift in temperature. Muscles relax, activity slows, and the signals of the brain's internal clock encourage the body to move toward rest. Heat that built up during the day can gradually disperse through the skin. This release of warmth is one of the signals associated with the transition into sleep. In environments where the surrounding air becomes cooler during the evening, that warmth disperses into a landscape that is also losing heat from the day. The body therefore does not remain perfectly insulated from the environment, but exchanges warmth with it as sleep progresses. If the surrounding air becomes too cold, the body responds by conserving heat through small adjustments such as narrowing blood vessels near the skin or drawing limbs closer toward the core. These responses help maintain stable internal conditions even when the environment shifts around the sleeper. Throughout the night, these adjustments occur quietly and continuously. The body releases warmth, retains it, or redistributes it depending on what the environment demands. For early humans who slept in places without sealed buildings or controlled heating, this ongoing balance between body and environment was part of ordinary rest. The body did not exist in isolation from the landscape. Instead, it remained connected to the same cycle of warming and cooling that shaped the wider world. The natural decrease in internal temperature during sleep therefore unfolded within a setting where the air and ground were also cooling through the hours of darkness. In modern environments, artificial heating can alter this relationship. Indoor spaces can remain warm and stable through the entire night, sometimes reducing the body's exposure to the natural drop in temperature that follows sunset outdoors. Even so, the internal rhythm of human sleep continues to follow patterns shaped over a long evolutionary history. The body still lowers its internal warmth during the evening and reaches its cooler point later in the night. This rhythm emerged in a world where the environment often cooled alongside the sleeping body. For countless generations of humans resting in natural settings, sleep unfolded within that shared descent of warmth, with the body's internal clock moving quietly in step with the cooling night that surrounded it. During sleep, the human body does not remain completely still in its internal balance with the environment. Even while resting, it continues adjusting quietly in response to changes in the surrounding air and surfaces. One of the simplest adjustments involves posture. When people feel cooler, they often draw their limbs slightly inward, bringing arms and legs closer to the torso. This position reduces the amount of skin exposed to the surrounding air and helps conserve warmth around the core of the body where vital organs are located. When warmth increases again, the body may stretch outward, increasing the surface area through which heat can leave the skin. These movements are subtle and often occur without waking the sleeper fully. They represent small ways in which the body maintains stability while resting through the night. In environments shaped by natural temperature cycles, Such adjustments would have occurred regularly as the air and ground cooled after sunset. The body responded moment by moment to these gradual changes, releasing warmth when possible and conserving it when necessary. This ability to shift posture and regulate heat helped humans rest even when the surrounding environment was not perfectly controlled. Another quiet process involves the skin itself. The skin acts as the boundary between the warm interior of the body and the cooler world outside. Blood flow near the surface can change during sleep, influencing how warmth moves outward. When the body needs to release heat, blood vessels near the skin widen slightly, allowing warmth to spread outward and disperse into the surrounding air. When the body needs to retain heat, those vessels narrow, keeping more warmth closer to the center of the body. These responses occur automatically through the body's regulatory systems and help maintain a stable internal environment despite shifts in external temperature. In natural settings where nighttime air gradually cooled, these adjustments would have helped balance the body's internal warmth with the environment of the night. The sleeper remained connected to the surrounding landscape, but the body itself worked continuously to maintain the conditions needed for rest. The coverings and materials used during sleep also interacted with these biological processes. A layer of animal skin or plant fibers could trap some of the warmth released from the body, creating a small pocket of warmer air close to the sleeper. This pocket reduced the speed at which heat escaped into the cooler surroundings. At the same time, the body continued to regulate how much warmth it released through the skin beneath those coverings. The result was a cooperative system in which materials from the environment and the body's own regulatory mechanisms worked together. Neither alone could create a perfectly stable temperature through the entire night, but together they allowed people to rest even as the world around them cooled. Over long stretches of human history, these small adjustments became part of the ordinary experience of sleep. The body did not require a fixed indoor temperature to function. Instead, it rested within an environment that changed gradually through the hours of darkness. The cooling of the air, the slow loss of heat from the ground, the fading warmth of a nearby fire, and the body's own internal rhythms all interacted during the night. Within this shifting environment, the human body remained capable of maintaining balance through posture, circulation, and shared warmth with coverings or companions. These biological abilities did not eliminate the presence of cooler conditions during sleep, but they helped humans live within them. In the long history of our species, sleep developed not in constant warmth, but within a living exchange between the body's internal heat and the slowly cooling landscape of the night. Among mammals that remain active in open environments, thick fur often plays an important role in protecting the body from changes in temperature. Fur traps small layers of air close to the skin, creating a natural barrier that slows the movement of heat from the body to the surrounding environment. Many animals that sleep outdoors rely on this layer to maintain warmth through cool nights. Humans, however, are unusual among large mammals in that the body is covered by relatively little natural hair. Compared with the dense fur of many other species, human skin is far more exposed. This difference did not happen suddenly. Over long periods of evolutionary time, early human ancestors gradually lost much of the thick body hair that once covered their bodies. Several explanations have been proposed for why this change occurred, including the advantages of regulating body heat during daytime activity and long-distance movement in warm environments. Whatever the precise combination of reasons, the result is clear in the bodies people carry today. Human skin is largely uncovered by fur, and this means that warmth cannot be preserved in the same way that it is for animals whose bodies are naturally insulated. When the night air cools, human skin can lose heat more quickly unless other forms of protection are used. In the long history of our species, this characteristic shaped how humans responded to nighttime environments. Without thick fur to trap warmth across the entire body, people relied on other strategies to remain comfortable enough to sleep. One of the most important of these strategies involved the use of coverings made from materials found in the surrounding landscape. Animal skins, furs, woven plant fibers, and other forms of clothing could provide layers that slowed the loss of heat from the skin. These materials did not replace the function of natural fur entirely, but they offered flexible protection that could be adjusted according to weather, season, and available resources. A person resting under a skin or wrapped in layers of plant fibers created a small insulated space similar to the air pockets held within animal fur. This space trapped warmth released from the body and helped maintain a more stable temperature close to the skin. Yet these coverings were not always thick, uniform, or permanently available in the way that natural fur is for many animals. Their effectiveness depended on how they were made, how dry they remained, and whether enough material existed for everyone within a group. The development of clothing and coverings therefore became an important cultural response to the loss of thick body hair. Instead of relying solely on biology, humans used tools, materials, and shared knowledge to create protection against the cooling of night. This shift represents an important moment in human history, when warmth during rest became partly dependent on cultural practices rather than only on physical traits inherited from earlier ancestors. Archaeological discoveries provide indirect evidence of these developments. Stone tools used for scraping hides suggest the preparation of animal skins, while preserved fragments of ancient fibers hint at early forms of weaving and clothing. Although such materials rarely survive for long periods, the tools associated with them appear repeatedly in sites connected to human activity. These clues suggest that early people invested time and effort into creating coverings that help protect the body from environmental conditions. At night, these coverings played a role in reducing the loss of heat from exposed skin while people rested close to the earth or near fading fires. Even with these protective layers, however, the environment still influenced human sleep. Clothing and skins helped manage the cold rather than remove it completely. The body remained connected to the cooler air and ground that surrounded it through the long hours of darkness. For much of human history, the absence of thick natural fur meant that warmth during sleep depended on a combination of body heat, shared coverings, and the materials people could gather from the landscape. Once humans began relying on materials rather than natural fur to preserve warmth, the act of staying warm at night became connected to skill, preparation, and shared effort. A thick coat of fur grows automatically on an animal's body and remains present through every night it sleeps outdoors. For humans, warmth had to be assembled from pieces of the surrounding world. Animal skins had to be removed, cleaned, scraped, and softened before they could be used effectively. Plant fibers needed to be gathered, twisted, or woven into coverings that could trap warmth. These processes required time and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. The warmth that protected a sleeping body was therefore not only biological, but also cultural. It existed because people learned how to shape materials from the landscape into protective layers that could slow the loss of heat during the night. Even with these efforts, coverings rarely functioned as perfect insulation. Animal skins and plant materials varied in thickness, softness, and durability. Some coverings might be heavy and warm, but difficult to carry over long distances. Others could be lighter and easier to transport, but offered less protection against cooler air. In mobile communities, where people often traveled through landscapes in search of food and water, the materials used for warmth needed to balance comfort with practicality. A person might own only a limited number of skins or woven coverings, and those items might serve many purposes throughout the day. The same material that kept someone warm at night might also be worn as clothing during the day or used to carry objects while moving across the land. Because of this shared use, the coverings available during sleep were shaped by daily life rather than designed exclusively for nighttime warmth. The effectiveness of these materials also depended on environmental conditions. A dry skin or woven fiber covering could trap air and help retain warmth, but moisture from rain, humidity, or ground contact could reduce that effect. Damp materials conduct heat more easily than dry ones, allowing warmth to escape from the body more quickly. In landscapes where weather shifted frequently, maintaining dry coverings may have required careful attention. People might hang skins near a fire to dry them, or place sleeping surfaces above damp soil when possible. These small acts of maintenance help preserve the insulating qualities of the materials used during sleep. Yet even when carefully prepared, coverings rarely isolated the body completely from the surrounding climate. The air moving through shelters, the cooling of the ground, and the fading warmth of nearby fires all continued to influence the sleeping environment. Over time, human communities developed many variations of clothing and coverings suited to different climates. In colder regions, thicker layers of fur or hide could be prepared to protect against lower temperatures. In warmer environments, lighter coverings might be used primarily for modest insulation or protection from insects rather than heavy warmth. These differences show how human culture adapted to the many environments in which people lived, Still, across much of the human timeline, the materials used for warmth remained closely connected to the natural resources of the land. The body resting beneath those coverings was not sealed inside a perfectly controlled climate. Instead, it remained part of a dynamic environment where warmth was gathered, shared, and gradually lost through the hours of night. In this way, the absence of thick natural fur led humans to develop flexible strategies for warmth that depended on skill and cooperation. The coverings people used during sleep softened the cooling of the night but rarely removed it entirely. The sleeping body remained aware of the broader landscape around it, wrapped in materials shaped by human hands, yet still connected to the cooling air and earth of the natural world. Because warmth no longer came automatically from thick natural fur, it became something that human groups managed together. The materials that helped preserve heat were often shared, prepared, and maintained within a community rather than belonging only to a single individual. Preparing animal skins, drying fibers, or arranging coverings near a fire required attention and cooperation. In this sense, warmth during sleep was not only a personal condition but also a social one. A person resting at night was often supported by the knowledge and labor of others who helped create the coverings and shelters that slowed the loss of heat. This collective aspect of warmth is an important difference between humans and many other animals. For species covered in dense fur, insulation travels with the body at all times. For humans, the ability to remain warm depended partly on the materials available in the environment and partly on the social structures that allowed those materials to be prepared and shared. Within early human groups, the preparation of skins and fibers likely followed patterns of skill that developed across generations. Stone tools associated with scraping and cutting hides appear in many archaeological sites, suggesting that people invested effort into processing animal skins into usable materials. The goal was not only to create clothing for daytime activity, but also to provide protection against the cooling air of night. A carefully prepared skin could trap a layer of still air close to the body, slowing the outward flow of warmth. Yet even the best coverings remained part of a larger system that included fire, shelter, and the arrangement of sleeping spaces. No single element alone could create the stable warmth that modern insulated buildings provide. Instead, warmth during sleep emerged from the interaction of many small solutions working together. The limits of these materials also meant that the sleeping environment often remained connected to the natural rhythm of the night. A covering might protect the upper part of the body while the ground beneath still cooled slowly through the hours of darkness. A skin draped across the shoulders might hold warmth near the chest while the air beyond its edges remained cooler. In many cases, warmth was unevenly distributed rather than perfectly balanced. Some parts of the body might feel warmer while others felt the gentle coolness of the surrounding air. Over time, people likely adjusted the position of coverings, turning or drawing materials closer during sleep as conditions changed. These small movements formed part of the ordinary experience of resting in natural environments. The absence of dense fur therefore shaped human life in a subtle but lasting way. Instead of relying entirely on biological insulation, humans developed cultural strategies that allowed them to adapt to a wide range of climates. Clothing, coverings, and shared sleeping arrangements became tools through which warmth could be managed rather than automatically provided. This flexibility helped humans spread across many parts of the world, from warm regions near the equator to colder landscapes farther from it. Yet even as these strategies improved, they rarely created a perfectly stable environment through the entire night. The body remained linked to the cooling patterns of the landscape. The covering slowed the loss of warmth but did not isolate the sleeper completely from the surrounding air and earth. For much of human history, the absence of thick natural fur meant that sleeping warmth depended on a combination of body heat, shared knowledge, and materials gathered from the land. Wrapped in skins or fibers shaped by human hands, the sleeper rested within a world that still cooled gradually after sunset, managing the night rather than escaping it. Warmth in natural environments was rarely held by one body alone. For much of human history, sleep often occurred in the presence of others, and this closeness carried more than social meaning. When several people rest near each other, the warmth produced by their bodies gathers in a shared space, rather than dispersing freely into the surrounding air. Each human body releases heat continuously, and when bodies are close together, that warmth becomes part of a small collective environment. the air between them can remain slightly warmer than the air beyond the group. In the open landscapes where early humans lived, this simple physical effect could make a meaningful difference during the cooler hours of the night. Sleeping near others therefore helped reduce the speed at which warmth escaped from each individual body. The group formed a small island of shared heat within the larger cooling environment. This pattern is not unique to humans. Many animals rest in groups for similar reasons, especially when nighttime temperatures fall below the warmth of the body. By gathering together, they reduce the surface area exposed to the surrounding air and retain heat more efficiently. Humans, with their relatively bare skin compared with fur-covered animals, may have benefited even more from this effect. When several bodies lay close together under shared coverings or within the same shelter, the warmth they produced combined within that space. The surrounding air warmed slightly from this collective heat, slowing the loss of warmth from each person's skin. In the absence of thick natural fur or insulated buildings, this simple arrangement helped make nighttime rest more stable. Archaeological and anthropological observations suggest that early human sleeping areas often involved shared spaces rather than isolated individual beds. Groups gathered around hearths, within shelters, or in protected areas of the landscape where people could remain close together through the night. These shared sleeping arrangements were shaped by many factors, including safety, communication, and the care of children. Yet the physical effect of shared warmth likely played an additional role. A cluster of people resting close to one another creates a warmer microenvironment than a single person lying alone in open air. Over long periods of human history, such arrangements may have helped people manage the cooling of night while maintaining the social bonds that supported group life. The warmth generated within a group is subtle but continuous. Each person produces heat through normal metabolism, and that warmth spreads outward from the skin into the surrounding air. When bodies are separated by distance, that heat disperses quickly into the wider environment. When bodies are close together, the warmth from one person becomes part of the environment felt by another. The effect does not eliminate the cooling of night, but it can slow the rate at which warmth is lost. Shared coverings, such as animal skins or woven materials, further strengthen this effect by trapping the warmth produced by several bodies beneath the same layer. In such conditions, the air under the covering gradually warms as heat accumulates from multiple sources. The group becomes both the source and the beneficiary of that warmth. For humans sleeping in landscapes where the air cooled steadily after sunset, this shared warmth offered a simple and effective way to soften the cold. It required no special technology beyond the presence of other people and the willingness to sleep close together. Over generations, the habit of resting in groups became woven into the rhythms of human life. The warmth of companions combined with coverings and firelight nearby helped create a sleeping environment that balanced the cooling of the night with the heat produced by living bodies. Sleeping close together also shaped how warmth moved through the shared space of the night. When a group rested near a fire or within a shelter, their bodies formed a cluster that changed the small environment around them. The warmth released by each person rose slowly into the air, mixing with the warmth produced by others nearby. Instead of dispersing immediately into the wider night, some of that heat remained within the small space between bodies. The effect could be subtle, yet over the long hours of darkness it helped slow the cooling that each person might have felt alone. When coverings such as animal skins or woven plant materials were placed over several people at once, the warmth produced by the group remained within that shared space even more effectively. The covering trapped pockets of air that gradually warmed from the combined body heat beneath it. In this way, the group itself became part of the system that preserved warmth during sleep. This arrangement was not only about temperature. Sleeping close together also reflected the social structure of human life across long stretches of time. Early human communities depended heavily on cooperation for survival. Hunting, gathering, childcare, and protection from predators often involved the coordinated efforts of many individuals. Nighttime rest reflected these same patterns of closeness. People gathered around hearths, shared shelters, and remained near one another during the hours of darkness. Safety, communication, and warmth all encouraged this proximity. A group sleeping together could respond more quickly to unexpected sounds or dangers in the surrounding landscape. At the same time, the closeness of bodies helped soften the cooling air that moved through the shelter or across the ground outside. Warmth, therefore, became both a physical and social experience, shared across the members of the group rather than held by one person alone. Children likely played an especially important role in these shared sleeping arrangements. Young bodies lose heat more quickly than adult bodies because of their smaller size and greater surface area relative to their mass. Staying close to adults helped maintain warmth during cooler nights. The warmth of a child, in turn, added to the small pool of heat within the group. Over time, the presence of several bodies beneath shared coverings created a layered exchange of warmth that spread gradually through the sleeping space. Each person contributed to the environment that everyone experienced. This pattern did not remove the cooling of the night entirely. The surrounding air still lost the warmth of the day, and the ground beneath the group continued to release heat into the sky above. Yet the cluster of bodies slowed the speed at which warmth escaped from each individual sleeper. The result was a small pocket of shared warmth surrounded by the cooler landscape of night. In many parts of the world, such arrangements remained common long after more complex shelters began to appear. Even in later historical periods, families and communities sometimes slept in close proximity, sharing warmth beneath common coverings. This pattern reflects how the human body and social life developed together across thousands of years. Before individual bedrooms and separate beds became widespread, the warmth of sleep was often distributed across several people within the same space. The habit of resting together therefore shaped the nighttime environment in ways that extended beyond comfort alone. It helped human communities live within a cooling landscape by allowing warmth to accumulate where bodies gathered. Over long stretches of human history, the shared heat of companions became one of the simplest and most reliable forms of protection against the gradual loss of warmth that accompanied the long hours of darkness. When several people rested together through the night, the warmth they created did not remain fixed in one place. It shifted gently as bodies moved, as coverings were adjusted, and as the air within the sleeping space slowly changed. Sleep is rarely a completely motionless state. Even in deep rest, people turn their bodies, draw coverings closer, or move slightly to find a more comfortable position. Within a shared sleeping space, these movements influenced how warmth spread through the group. A person turning toward another might feel the warmth of that body more strongly, while someone shifting closer to the center of the group might experience a slightly warmer pocket of air beneath shared coverings. These small changes formed part of the quiet rhythm of nighttime rest. The group did not remain frozen in one arrangement for the entire night. Instead, warmth flowed gently through the space as people adjusted their positions within the cluster. Over the long hours before sunrise, this movement helped distribute heat more evenly among those resting together. In environments where the air continued cooling after sunset, the shared warmth of the group became a resource that moved gradually between bodies. This subtle exchange of warmth also reflected the structure of human relationships within the group. Adults, children, and elders often slept in close proximity, and their different needs could shape the arrangement of sleeping spaces. Children might rest between adults who provided both protection and warmth. Elders might remain near the center of the group where the shared heat of several bodies gathered. These patterns were not necessarily rigid rules, but practical responses to the conditions of the night. By sleeping near one another, people created a small environment in which warmth circulated gently among them. Each body contributed heat to the space, and that heat gradually mixed with the warmth of others beneath shared coverings or within sheltered areas. The result was a living system of warmth that changed slowly as the night progressed. The surrounding landscape, however, continued its larger pattern of cooling. The air beyond the group lost the warmth of the day, and the ground beneath the sleeping area gradually released its stored heat into the sky. Within that cooling world, the cluster of human bodies formed a small counterbalance. The warmth generated by the group did not stop the night from becoming cooler, but it slowed the effect within the immediate sleeping space. The closer the bodies remained to one another, the more that warmth could be shared. This physical reality likely influenced how human communities organized their sleeping arrangements across many generations. Resting together allowed warmth to remain within reach even when the surrounding environment continued to change. Modern sleeping habits often look very different. Individual beds, separate rooms, and insulated houses reduce the need for people to rely on one another's warmth during the night. Temperature can be controlled through heating systems that keep the air inside a building steady regardless of the conditions outside. Yet these modern solutions are relatively recent when measured against the long history of human life. For most of that history, warmth during sleep emerged through the combined effects of fire, coverings, shelter, and the presence of other people nearby. The cluster of bodies resting together formed a quiet center of warmth within the broader landscape of night. As darkness deepened and the air cooled across the land, human groups lay close to one another, sharing the heat produced by living bodies, while the surrounding world slowly released the warmth of the day. Not every human night across history felt the same. The Earth contains many climates, and the experience of darkness and temperature can vary greatly from one landscape to another. Some regions remain warm through much of the year, while others cool more sharply once the sun disappears. Forests, deserts, coastlines, grasslands, and high plateaus each shape how heat moves through the air after sunset. Because humans spread gradually across many parts of the world, the conditions surrounding sleep also changed with geography. A night in a humid tropical forest might cool only slightly compared with the day, while a night in open dry land could lose warmth more quickly under clear skies. These differences remind us that the story of human sleep cannot be reduced to a single climate or environment. Yet even with this diversity, a common pattern remained present in many places where humans lived. The warmth of the day tended to fade once the sun set, and the night moved gradually toward cooler conditions before dawn. This pattern formed the background against which sleep unfolded across a wide range of landscapes. In tropical regions near the equator, daytime temperatures often remain high, and nights may stay relatively mild compared with colder parts of the world. Even there, however, the transition from day to night typically involves some reduction in warmth. The ground releases the heat it stored under the sun, and the air cools as darkness spreads. The change may be gentle rather than dramatic, but it still marks a shift from the warmth of daylight. For humans resting in these regions, sleep occurred during this quieter phase of the temperature cycle. The environment was not frozen or severe, yet it was rarely identical to the warmth experienced during the day. A mild cooling still accompanied the hours of darkness. In other parts of the world, the difference between day and night could be more noticeable. Dry landscapes with open skies allow heat to escape rapidly after sunset because there are few clouds or dense vegetation layers to trap warmth. In such environments, the air can cool steadily as the night progresses. The ground beneath the sleeper also releases heat into the sky, gradually becoming cooler through the hours before sunrise. Humans living in these landscapes experienced nights that moved more clearly away from the warmth of the day. Even if fires, coverings, and shared sleeping spaces softened the change, the broader environment still followed its natural cooling rhythm. Geography therefore shaped the details of how people experienced nighttime temperatures, but it rarely removed the pattern entirely. Another factor influencing nighttime conditions was elevation. In highland regions or mountainous terrain, air temperatures often decrease more rapidly after sunset than in lower areas. Thin air and open exposure to the sky can accelerate the loss of heat from the ground. Human communities living in such places developed sleeping arrangements suited to those conditions, often relying more heavily on coverings, fires, and shared warmth. These strategies helped balance the colder air that could arrive during the darker hours of the night. Yet even in these environments, sleep remained connected to the broader landscape rather than sealed away from it. Across the wide geography of human history, the details of nighttime warmth varied from place to place. Some nights were mild, others cooler, and the intensity of the change depended on many environmental factors. Still, the deeper pattern remained recognizable. Day warmed the land, and night gradually allowed that warmth to fade. Human sleep developed within that global rhythm rather than outside it. Whether in forests, plains, or highlands, people lay down to rest as the surrounding world moved slowly away from the heat of the sun. Season also shaped how humans experienced the cooling of night. In many regions of the world, the difference between daytime warmth and nighttime air changes across the year as the angle of the sun shifts and the length of daylight rises or falls. During warmer seasons, the sun remains higher in the sky, and the land absorbs more energy during the day. Nights that follow may still cool, but they often begin from a higher starting point of warmth. During cooler seasons, the sun travels lower across the sky and daylight hours grow shorter. The ground absorbs less heat, and the air may cool more noticeably once darkness arrives. For human communities living in these regions, sleep was not tied to a single set of conditions. Instead, it unfolded within a seasonal rhythm that changed gradually through the year. A place that felt comfortably warm at night during one season might feel cooler several months later when the sun's energy was weaker and daylight shorter. This seasonal pattern meant that people had to adjust their sleeping practices over time. Coverings, fire use, and sleeping arrangements could shift as the environment changed. In warmer months, lighter coverings might be enough to remain comfortable through the night. In cooler months, thicker skins or additional materials might be gathered to help retain warmth. Fires might burn longer during certain times of the year, and sleeping areas could be arranged more closely together to share body heat. These adjustments did not alter the fundamental rhythm of night cooling after sunset, but they helped people live within it as conditions shifted across the seasons. Even in places with relatively mild climates, the gradual changes of the year influenced how warmth was experienced after dark. The length of the night itself could also shape the experience of sleep. When nights are longer, the period during which the land releases its stored heat extends further before sunrise begins warming the ground again. This means that the cooler phase of the night can last longer during certain seasons. For people resting close to the earth or within simple shelters, the extended darkness allowed the cooling process to continue for additional hours. Fires, coverings, and shared warmth helped balance this change, but the broader environmental pattern remained present. In contrast, during seasons when nights are shorter, the cooling period ends sooner as the sun returns earlier in the morning. The warmth of daylight begins rebuilding the temperature of the landscape more quickly. In this way, the seasonal movement of the earth around the sun subtly reshaped the conditions surrounding human sleep throughout the year. Early human communities would have been familiar with these cycles through daily experience. Over generations, knowledge about seasonal changes likely became part of practical life. People could anticipate when nights would grow cooler and prepare coverings or fuel accordingly. They might choose sleeping areas that offered more protection from wind during colder seasons or move camps to places better suited to the changing environment. These decisions reflected an awareness of the broader patterns of the natural world rather than attempts to completely escape them. Sleep remained part of a living landscape whose temperature shifted with both the time of night and the time of year. The seasonal cycle, therefore, added another layer to the relationship between humans and nighttime cooling. Geography determined the general climate of a region, while the progression of the year adjusted how that climate was felt from month to month. Together, these forces shaped the conditions in which people rested across the long history of our species. The warmth of the day, the cooling of night, and the changing seasons formed an interconnected system that influenced how humans experienced sleep long before buildings could create a stable indoor temperature independent of the natural world. Across the vast geography of human history, these differences in climate and season created many variations in how night was experienced. Some places cooled quickly after sunset under wide, clear skies, while others remained warmer because clouds, vegetation, or moisture slowed the loss of heat from the land. Coastal regions sometimes felt different from inland landscapes because large bodies of water can store heat during the day and release it gradually through the night. Dense forests could soften temperature changes by trapping warmth beneath layers of leaves and branches, while open plains allowed heat to escape more freely into the sky. These environmental differences meant that the details of nighttime comfort varied from one region to another. Yet even with this diversity, a shared pattern remained visible across many parts of the human world. Darkness often marked the beginning of a gradual movement away from the warmth of the day. Human sleep developed within that wider rhythm rather than inside a constant climate. The exact degree of cooling could change with geography, but the direction of change toward cooler air after sunset appeared in many places where humans lived. This perspective helps explain why sleeping conditions across human history cannot be understood through a single environment alone. The experience of night in a humid tropical forest differed from that of an open savanna or a high plateau. Still, the body resting in each of these places remained connected to the natural cycle of warmth and cooling that followed the movement of the sun. In forests, the cooling might occur more slowly because the canopy reduced the amount of heat escaping upward. In dry landscapes, the cooling might be more noticeable because clear skies allowed heat to radiate away quickly. Near the sea, water could moderate the change by releasing stored warmth into the surrounding air. These variations shaped the details of how people arranged their sleeping places and managed warmth during the night. Fires, coverings, shelters, and shared sleeping spaces were all influenced by the environment in which people lived. Yet these strategies usually worked alongside the natural rhythm of the landscape rather than replacing it. Even in regions where nights remained relatively mild, the warmth of daylight still faded gradually as darkness deepened. The cooling might be gentle, but it was part of the same cycle that affected the land and air across the planet. Over long stretches of time, humans learned to live within this environmental diversity. Communities developed practices suited to their local climates while still experiencing the broader pattern of night cooling that followed sunset. Some groups relied more heavily on thick coverings, others on shelter design, and others on the warmth of companions or fires. These differences reflected the wide range of environments humans inhabited as they spread across continents. Yet the underlying relationship between sleep and the cooling of night remained recognizable. The body rested while the landscape slowly released the heat it had gathered from the sun. Only much later in human history did buildings, insulation, and heating systems begin to separate sleep from this global rhythm. Before those developments, the environment surrounding human rest remained part of the same planetary cycle that governed every sunset. Whether in forest, desert, coastline, or highland, people lay down to sleep while the world moved gradually away from the warmth of the day and toward the cooler hours before sunrise. Much of what we understand about early human life comes from fragments left behind in the earth. Archaeology rarely preserves the full picture of how people slept, what materials they used each night, or exactly how warm their resting places felt. Organic objects such as grasses, skins, woven fibers, and simple shelters often decay long before they can be discovered. Because of this, the traces of ancient sleep are subtle. Instead of beds or blankets preserved in perfect detail, archaeologists usually find indirect signs: patches of ash where fires once burned, clusters of stone tools, layers of soil shaped by repeated human activity, or the arrangement of living spaces within caves and open campsites. From these clues, researchers gradually piece together how humans organized their evenings and where they likely rested during the night. One of the most common discoveries in archaeological sites associated with human habitation is the hearth. Hearths appear as concentrations of ash, charcoal, burned stones, or soil that has been altered by repeated exposure to fire. These features often occupy central positions within living areas, suggesting that fire played an important role in the activities that took place after sunset. Around these hearths, archaeologists sometimes find stone tools, food remains, or other objects indicating that people gathered nearby. Although the exact locations where individuals slept are rarely preserved in the soil, the presence of hearths strongly suggests that warmth and light from fire formed the center of nighttime life. People likely arranged their resting places around these sources of heat, positioning themselves close enough to benefit from the warmth while remaining within the shared space of the group. Yet even these hearths reveal something important about the limits of nighttime warmth in early human environments. The remains of ancient fires show that the warmth available during the night came from localized sources rather than from enclosed heating systems. A hearth produced heat that spread outward into the surrounding air, gradually fading with distance. Archaeological sites do not usually show signs of fully enclosed structures designed to trap that heat in a sealed interior space. Instead, the evidence often suggests open areas or lightly sheltered environments where fire provided warmth within a broader landscape that remained exposed to the cooling night. This pattern supports the idea that human sleep occurred near islands of warmth created by fire rather than inside buildings capable of maintaining a stable indoor temperature. Other clues also help researchers imagine how sleeping spaces might have been arranged. In some sites, the distribution of artifacts suggests zones of activity where food preparation, tool use, and rest took place in different parts of the same area. Hearths frequently appear near these activity zones, indicating that warmth and light influenced how people organized their living spaces. Some sites also contain layers of plant remains or soil patterns that hint at repeated use of particular areas, possibly including places where people gathered or slept. These traces are rarely complete enough to reconstruct the exact details of a sleeping surface, but they provide glimpses of how human groups structured their nightly environment. What emerges from this evidence is not the picture of perfectly warm rooms, but rather a landscape in which fire, shelter, and the natural environment interacted. The warmth that supported human rest was created in specific places within a broader world that continued cooling after sunset. Archaeology therefore reveals a pattern of warmth management rather than complete environmental control. The people who left these traces lived in environments where night remained present around them, even when firelight and shared spaces softened its effects. Beyond hearths and ash layers, archaeologists sometimes find additional clues that suggest how human groups organized their resting spaces. These clues are often subtle, appearing in patterns within the soil rather than in preserved objects that resemble modern bedding. In certain sites, the ground shows signs of repeated human presence in particular areas, forming slightly compacted surfaces or layers shaped by long-term use. Such areas may lie near hearths or within protected parts of a shelter, indicating places where people spent extended periods of time. While it is difficult to prove exactly where individuals slept, these patterns suggest that people returned to the same spots repeatedly for evening gatherings and rest. Over time, the consistent use of these spaces created traces in the soil that archaeologists can observe centuries or even thousands of years later. Occasionally, fragments of plant material or microscopic remains within ancient soil layers hint at the presence of organic matter that once covered the ground. These traces might include tiny plant fibers, seeds, or fragments of leaves that accumulated where people sat or lay down. Because plant materials decompose quickly in most environments, they rarely survive in recognizable form. However, chemical or microscopic analysis of soil sometimes reveals that plant matter once existed in certain locations. This evidence suggests that people may have placed vegetation on the ground to create softer or more insulated surfaces. Such arrangements would have helped separate the body slightly from the cooling earth while still leaving the sleeper connected to the natural environment around them. Even when these materials cannot be seen directly, their faint traces offer hints of how sleeping areas may have been prepared in the past. The spatial relationship between hearths and surrounding activity areas also provides insight into nighttime life. In many archaeological sites, the distribution of tools, bones, and other objects forms rings or clusters around central fire pits. These patterns indicate that people gathered around the warmth and light of the fire while carrying out various tasks. When the evening activities ended and sleep approached, it is likely that people remained in roughly the same vicinity rather than moving far away from the warmth. The fire, therefore, served as both the center of social life and the center of nighttime rest. People could lie down near the hearth where warmth was most available, arranging coverings or plant materials around them as needed. Yet the warmth from the fire still faded gradually into the surrounding air. The archaeological layout of these sites reinforces the idea that warmth existed in small localized areas rather than filling an enclosed structure. What the archaeological record rarely shows is evidence of complete thermal control over a sleeping environment. Unlike later historical buildings with thick walls or advanced heating systems, early living spaces often appear open or lightly sheltered. The traces left behind suggest that people organized their lives around the warmth that was available, rather than transforming the entire environment into a uniformly warm space. Fires, coverings, and shared proximity created pockets of comfort within a landscape that continued to cool through the night. These findings help modern researchers understand that early human sleep was shaped by practical adaptation rather than by the elimination of environmental change. The people who lived at these sites used the tools and materials available to them to manage warmth as best they could. They placed fires where groups gathered, arranged surfaces where people rested, and shared the limited warmth that these arrangements produced. The broader environment, however, remained present beyond those small centers of heat. Archaeology, therefore, reveals a world in which human sleep unfolded close to the rhythms of the landscape, with warmth carefully managed but rarely isolated from the cooling night that surrounded it. When archaeologists interpret the traces left behind at ancient sites, they must work carefully with limited evidence. The ground preserves fragments of past activity, but it rarely records the full details of daily life. Organic materials decay, structures collapse, and countless nights of human rest leave only faint impressions in the soil. Because of this, researchers often focus on patterns that repeat across many sites rather than drawing conclusions from a single discovery. When hearths appear repeatedly in central positions, when artifacts cluster around those hearths, and when areas of repeated use form near them, a consistent picture begins to emerge. Human groups gathered around firelight in the evening, and likely rested within reach of that warmth once darkness deepened. Yet the same archaeological record also shows the limits of how much warmth these environments could provide. The sites rarely reveal thick enclosed structures capable of trapping heat in the way later buildings could. Instead, many early living spaces appear open to the surrounding environment or only lightly protected by natural shelter. This pattern suggests that warmth during sleep came from specific sources, fires, coverings, and the presence of others rather than from fully heated spaces. The archaeological record, therefore, supports an image of nighttime life that remained connected to the broader landscape. Even where people created comfortable sleeping areas, those areas existed within environments that continued to cool after sunset. Another important aspect of archaeological interpretation involves recognizing how small differences in site structure can influence temperature and comfort. A hearth placed near a rock wall might reflect some warmth toward the interior of a shelter. A sleeping area, slightly elevated above damp ground, could remain drier and retain heat more effectively. The arrangement of stones around a fire might help contain embers and direct warmth inward. These choices demonstrate that people understood how to shape their surroundings to improve nighttime comfort. Yet these improvements remained practical adjustments rather than complete environmental control. The warmth they created spread only a short distance before fading into the cooler air beyond. By examining many sites across different regions and time periods, archaeologists have developed a broader understanding of how humans interacted with their nighttime environments. The evidence consistently shows people adapting to natural conditions rather than replacing them entirely. Fires were carefully maintained, sleeping areas were arranged near sources of warmth, and materials were placed on the ground to soften contact with the cooling earth. These practices help make rest possible in environments that lacked the thermal stability of modern buildings. The archaeological traces therefore point toward a pattern of warmth management that worked within the natural rhythm of night. The land cooled, the air shifted, and human communities organized their sleeping spaces to balance those changes as best they could. When modern readers imagine early human sleep, it can be tempting to fill the gaps in the record with assumptions drawn from present-day comfort. Archaeology reminds us that the reality was likely more gradual and closely tied to the environment. Instead of sealed rooms warmed for many hours, ancient sleeping places were shaped by the interaction between firelight, shelter, coverings, and the cooling landscape around them. The warmth available to the sleeper existed in pockets and layers, rather than filling the entire space. The ground beneath, the air beyond the fire, and the wider night sky all continued to influence the temperature of the sleeping environment. Through the careful interpretation of these traces, archaeologists reveal a world in which human rest took place close to the earth and within the changing climate of the night. The evidence does not describe perfectly warm rooms, but rather small centers of warmth created by human effort within a landscape that slowly lost the heat of the day. Within any human group, the experience of night was not identical for every person. Bodies differ in age, strength, and sensitivity to changes in temperature. A healthy adult who had spent the day moving, gathering food, or tending fires might generate more internal warmth than a child or an elder, whose body produced less heat. Because of these differences, the cooling of night could be felt in distinct ways by different members of the same community. For younger children, whose bodies are smaller and lose heat more quickly relative to their size, the surrounding air might feel cooler sooner than it did for an adult. Older individuals might also experience temperature changes differently as the body's systems responded more slowly to shifts in the environment. These natural differences meant that nighttime warmth within a group was not only an environmental matter, but also a question of how bodies of different ages shared space and protection during rest. The arrangement of sleeping spaces often reflected this reality. In shared shelters or around hearths, the most protected areas were often those closest to the center of warmth or the middle of the group. Children could remain between adults whose bodies produced more heat, allowing them to benefit from the warmth on both sides. Elders might also rest nearer to the group's center where the combined heat of several bodies accumulated beneath coverings. Such arrangements did not require formal planning each night. Over time, they could become ordinary habits shaped by practical experience. A sleeping group gradually formed patterns that helped those most sensitive to the cold remain comfortable enough to rest. The warmth generated by several adults, combined with shared coverings and the fading heat of nearby embers, created a small environment that supported the more vulnerable members of the community. Care for children during the night likely played an important role in these arrangements. Infants and young children depend heavily on adults for warmth and protection. Sleeping close to caregivers allowed them to remain within reach for feeding, comfort, and safety while also benefiting from the warmth of adult bodies. In cooler environments, this closeness could make a noticeable difference in maintaining body warmth through the darker hours of the night. The presence of children within the sleeping group therefore influenced how people arranged themselves under coverings or within shelters. Adults might shift their positions slightly to ensure that younger bodies remained protected from cooler air. These adjustments reflected both the physical needs of the body and the social bonds that held human communities together. The same principle extended to individuals who were ill, injured, or weakened by age. Within cooperative groups, people often supported one another by sharing resources and protection. Warmth during sleep was one of those resources. By resting near others, a person who produced less body heat could still benefit from the warmth generated by the group as a whole. This collective sharing of warmth helped maintain comfort through the night even when environmental temperatures continued to fall. In landscapes where darkness brought cooler air and ground, the sleeping group functioned as a small center of stability. The combined heat of several bodies, along with coverings and the remaining warmth of a nearby fire, created conditions that helped different members of the community rest together. Across the long history of human life, this shared management of warmth formed part of the social fabric of sleep. The body did not face the cooling night alone, but rested within a network of relationships that quietly helped balance the changing environment around them. As the night progressed and the surrounding air slowly cooled, the different needs of each body within the group continued to shape how people rested. Adults who had spent the day in physical activity often carried residual warmth from movement and metabolism. Their bodies generated heat steadily even during sleep. For individuals who produced less warmth, such as children, elders, or those weakened by illness, remaining near these sources of body heat could help maintain a more comfortable temperature through the darker hours. In shared sleeping spaces, this difference did not usually appear as a formal rule. Instead, it became part of the quiet arrangement of bodies within the group. Over time, people learned through experience which positions felt warmer and which areas of the sleeping space were more exposed to cooler air. Those more sensitive to the cold often gravitated toward the center of the group or toward areas sheltered by coverings and nearby warmth. The presence of a fire could also influence these arrangements. A hearth created a limited zone where warmth was more noticeable, especially during the earlier part of the night when flames or glowing embers still produced heat. People resting closest to that source might experience a slightly warmer environment, while those farther away felt more of the surrounding air. Within a cooperative group, individuals who needed greater protection from the cooling night could remain closer to this warmth when possible. Others who tolerated cooler air more easily might sleep farther from the center of heat. These patterns did not require constant discussion. They could emerge gradually through habit as people adjusted their positions in response to comfort and experience. Over many nights, the group developed an understanding of how warmth moved through their sleeping space and how it could be shared among its members. Children, especially very young ones, often remained physically connected to caregivers during sleep. This closeness offered reassurance and safety, but it also provided warmth. The heat of an adult body could help stabilize the temperature around a child who might otherwise lose warmth more quickly during the cooler hours before dawn. The adult in turn contributed to the shared warmth beneath coverings or within the shelter. Such arrangements illustrate how social relationships and environmental conditions work together during the night. Sleep was not simply an individual experience, but part of a shared system of care and adaptation. Elders within the group may have benefited from similar patterns of support. As the body ages, the ability to maintain stable warmth can sometimes become more sensitive to environmental change. Resting near others could help reduce exposure to cooler air and provide a steadier environment through the long hours of darkness. In this way, the sleeping group functioned as a cooperative structure that balanced the needs of its members. The warmth generated by several bodies, combined with coverings and the fading heat of a fire, helped maintain a small zone of relative comfort within the wider cooling landscape. The broader environment continued to follow its natural rhythm. The air gradually lost the warmth stored during the day, and the ground beneath the group slowly cooled as it released heat into the sky. Within that shifting environment, the sleeping community adjusted its internal arrangement to support those who required greater warmth. These patterns reveal how deeply human sleep has been shaped by cooperation. Across much of human history, the conditions of night were not controlled by technology or architecture. Instead, they were managed through relationships between people, through shared space, shared coverings, and the quiet distribution of warmth within the group. The cooling of night remained present, but human communities learned to soften its effects by resting together and caring for the different needs of the bodies that shared the same darkness. As the hours of darkness moved toward their coldest point before sunrise, the arrangement of bodies within the group continued to play a quiet role in maintaining warmth. The surrounding landscape had now spent many hours releasing the heat gathered during the day. The air was often cooler than it had been earlier in the evening, and the ground beneath the sleeping place had gradually lost some of its stored warmth as well. Within this cooling environment, the cluster of human bodies created a small balance against the wider changes of the night. Each person continued producing heat through the steady processes of the living body. When several individuals rested close together beneath shared coverings or within the same shelter, that warmth accumulated slowly in the space around them. For those who were most sensitive to the cooler air, children, elders, or those recovering from illness, remaining within this shared center of warmth could make the difference between comfort and chill during the final hours of the night. The sleeping group therefore functioned as more than a collection of individuals resting side by side. It became a living system in which warmth moved gradually among its members. The heat released from one body could warm the air around another, while coverings helped hold that warmth within the shared space for longer. Small adjustments during sleep, turning closer to a companion, pulling a covering higher, or shifting slightly toward the center of the group, allowed people to respond quietly to changes in temperature without fully waking. These movements formed part of the natural rhythm of rest, in environments where the night remained present within the sleeping space. Over generations, such habits likely became deeply familiar within human communities. People learned how to arrange themselves so that warmth flowed gently through the group as the night cooled around them. This pattern also reflects a broader feature of human life, the tendency to rely on social cooperation in response to environmental challenges. Food gathering, protection from danger, and the care of young all depended on shared effort. Warmth during sleep formed another part of that cooperative system. Instead of each person relying only on their own body heat, the group combined its warmth and resources to create a more stable environment for everyone. The cooling night still existed beyond the shelter, but within the cluster of resting bodies its effects could be softened. The arrangement of people, coverings, and nearby embers worked together to maintain a small zone of relative comfort until morning light returned. Modern living conditions often change this dynamic. Individual beds, separated rooms, and controlled indoor temperatures allow people to sleep without depending directly on the warmth of others nearby. Heating systems provide a steady environment that does not rely on shared body heat or close sleeping arrangements. Yet this modern pattern represents a relatively recent development in the long history of human life. For thousands of generations before insulated buildings became common, warmth during the night was created collectively. The sleeping group acted as a quiet center of heat within the broader landscape of darkness. As the night air cooled and the earth released its remaining warmth, people rested close to one another, sharing the heat of living bodies while waiting for the sun to begin warming the land again. For most of human history, the environments where people slept remained closely connected to the natural cycle of warmth and cooling that followed the movement of the sun. Yet over time, human communities gradually began creating structures that changed this relationship. As groups settled for longer periods in particular places, they invested more effort in building shelters that could offer stronger protection from weather and wind. Early walls made from earth, stone, wood, or packed plant materials created thicker barriers between the sleeping body and the outside air. Roofs became more stable and covered larger spaces, reducing the amount of heat lost upward during the night. These changes did not appear suddenly. They emerged slowly as people developed new ways of organizing daily life, especially when agriculture encouraged communities to remain in one place for longer stretches of time. Permanent settlements made it possible to construct buildings that required more labor but provided greater protection. With these structures came the first steps towards separating human sleep from the full influence of the surrounding landscape. Even in these early buildings, however, the separation was only partial. Walls reduce the movement of wind and rain, and roofs block the open sky above, but the interior temperature of these spaces still depended heavily on the environment outside. Without insulation materials or advanced heating systems, the air inside a structure could still cool through the night as the surrounding landscape released the warmth of the day. Fires continued to play an important role, often burning within hearths placed inside or near these buildings. The heat from those fires could linger within the enclosed space longer than it would in the open air, especially when walls reflected warmth back toward the interior. Yet the warmth remained limited and required fuel to maintain. The interior of these early buildings was not yet the evenly heated environment familiar in modern homes. Instead, it represented a gradual shift, a space where the cooling of night was softened but not entirely removed. Another important development involved the surfaces on which people slept. As buildings became more permanent, some communities began creating raised sleeping platforms or simple beds that lifted the body slightly above the ground. These surfaces could be made from wood, woven plant materials, or packed earth arranged in stable forms. Raising the body above the ground reduced direct contact with soil that cooled during the night. It also allowed layers of plant fibers, skins, or other materials to be placed between the sleeper and the ground more effectively. This change did not eliminate the cooling of the surrounding air, but it altered one of the pathways through which the body lost heat. The sleeper was no longer in constant contact with the earth itself, but rested on a structure designed to create a small separation between body and ground. Over time, these architectural and material developments gradually transformed the experience of night. The combination of walls, roofs, hearths, and raised sleeping surfaces created environments that held warmth more effectively than the open shelters of earlier periods. Yet the transformation remained incomplete for many centuries. Buildings still allowed air to circulate through openings, and the warmth of a fire still faded as the night progressed. The interior climate of these structures followed the outside environment more closely than the insulated homes of the modern world. Even so, these early architectural changes marked an important step in human history. For the first time, sleep began to occur within spaces that partially moderated the natural cooling of night. The landscape outside continued its familiar rhythm of losing warmth after sunset, but the sleeping body now rested within structures that could slow that process, holding some of the day's warmth a little longer than before. As settlements grew more stable and communities remained in the same locations for longer periods, the design of living spaces slowly became more complex. Houses were no longer temporary shelters built only for a few nights or seasons. Instead, they began to reflect careful planning about how people would live, work, and rest within the same structure. Walls were sometimes built thicker, using layers of stone, earth, or wood that could slow the movement of air between the inside and outside. Roofs covered larger areas and were constructed with materials arranged to block rain and wind more effectively. These changes gradually altered the environment in which people slept. The cooling of the night still occurred outside, but the interior space of a house could hold warmth slightly longer because the surrounding walls and roof slowed the escape of heat. In this way, buildings began to act as buffers between the sleeping body and the open landscape. One important feature in many early houses was the hearth placed inside the living space. Instead of burning a fire entirely outdoors, people sometimes built hearths within the structure itself. This arrangement allowed the warmth from the fire to spread through the enclosed space before drifting out through openings in the roof or walls. Even a small fire could make a noticeable difference when its heat was reflected by nearby surfaces rather than disappearing immediately into the open night. The walls of the structure could absorb some of that warmth and release it slowly back into the room as the night progressed. This effect did not create a perfectly stable temperature, but it softened the sharp drop in warmth that might occur in completely open environments. The sleeping body inside such a structure experienced a mixture of influences: the fading heat of the fire, the warmth stored briefly in walls and floors, and the cooling air of the night beyond the building. Another gradual change involved the materials used within the interior of houses. As communities settled and developed new crafts, people created woven mats, thicker layers of plant fibers, and improved animal skin coverings. These materials could be placed on raised platforms or simple bed frames to create sleeping surfaces more separated from the ground than before. The combination of interior walls and elevated sleeping areas helped reduce some of the pathways through which the body lost heat during the night. A sleeper lying on a mat above the ground within a house experienced less direct contact with the cooling earth and less exposure to moving air than someone resting on open ground outside. Yet, even these improvements did not completely isolate the sleeper from environmental changes. Openings for smoke or ventilation allowed air to move through the structure, and the fire itself required fresh oxygen to continue burning. As a result, indoor spaces remained connected to the broader climate. When the outside air cooled during the night, the interior air gradually followed, though often more slowly than in the open landscape. These developments therefore represent an intermediate stage in the long transformation of human sleep. The structures people built offered greater protection than earlier shelters, but they did not yet provide the stable warmth associated with modern homes. Instead, they created environments where the natural cooling of night was moderated but still present. People continued to rely on coverings, shared warmth, and the management of fire to remain comfortable through the darker hours. Over generations, however, the accumulation of architectural knowledge slowly shifted the balance between humans and the environment. Each improvement in building design, interior materials, and sleeping surfaces helped hold warmth a little longer inside the living space. These gradual changes prepared the way for later innovations that would eventually allow humans to sleep in environments where the temperature of the night could be controlled far more completely than in the long earlier chapters of human history. As generations passed and knowledge about building accumulated, the relationship between human sleep and the surrounding environment continued to change. Houses became more than simple protection from wind and rain. They gradually evolved into spaces designed to hold warmth for longer periods of time. Walls built from heavier materials such as packed earth, stone, or thick timber could absorb heat during the day and release it slowly after sunset. Roofs covered more completely overhead, reducing the amount of warmth that escaped upward into the night sky. Floors were sometimes layered with materials that created additional separation between the ground and the sleeping body. Each of these changes slightly altered the way warmth moved through the sleeping environment. Instead of cooling immediately with the outside air, the interior of a house could retain some of the heat gathered earlier in the day or produced by a nearby fire. This did not eliminate the cooling of night entirely, but it slowed the process. The space where people slept became less exposed to the full rhythm of the surrounding landscape. Another quiet transformation occurred as sleeping surfaces themselves became more deliberate structures within the house. In earlier environments, the body often rested directly on the earth or on simple layers of gathered material. Inside more permanent buildings, raised sleeping platforms or simple bed frames appeared in some communities. These structures lifted the sleeper farther from the ground and allowed thicker layers of plant fibers, skins, or woven materials to be placed beneath the body. The additional space between the sleeper and the earth reduced the direct transfer of heat into the cooling soil below. At the same time, coverings placed above the body could trap warmth more effectively within the enclosed interior of the house. The combination of walls, roofs, raised sleeping surfaces, and layered coverings created a sleeping environment that retained warmth more successfully than the open shelters of earlier times. Yet even with these developments, the night remained present within the house. Small openings allowed smoke from indoor fires to escape, and fresh air moved through gaps in walls or doorways. These openings were necessary for safety and ventilation, but they also meant that the interior climate still followed the broader changes of the outside world. As the hours passed and the landscape cooled, the air inside the house gradually cooled as well. The difference was that the change often happened more slowly than it would in the open air. Warmth from a hearth might linger for longer within the enclosed space, and heat stored in the walls or floor could delay the full arrival of the night's chill. The sleeper inside such a house therefore experienced a moderated version of the natural cycle rather than a completely separate climate. This stage represents an important turning point in the long story of human sleep. For countless generations before permanent architecture, people rested in environments where the cooling of night reached them almost directly through open air and exposed ground. With the spread of more substantial buildings, the sleeping body began to occupy spaces that held warmth more effectively. The difference was gradual rather than sudden, unfolding over long stretches of time as building techniques improved. Eventually, these developments would lead to houses designed specifically to retain heat, with thicker walls, enclosed rooms, and improved control over fire and airflow. But even in their earlier forms, these buildings marked the beginning of a new relationship between humans and the night. the body no longer rested entirely within the open rhythm of the landscape. Instead, it slept inside structures that softened the cooling of darkness, holding a small portion of the day's warmth within walls built by human hands. Over the long history of human life, the relationship between sleep and temperature slowly moved in a new direction. Earlier generations had rested in environments where the cooling of night reached them directly through the air, the ground, and the fading warmth of nearby fires. As buildings became more substantial and technologies for heating improved, this connection between the sleeping body and the natural rhythm of night gradually weakened. Walls grew thicker, roofs became more tightly sealed, and interior spaces were designed to hold warmth longer than before. Fireplaces were placed within houses in ways that allowed heat to spread more evenly across rooms. Later still, new methods of heating began to appear, allowing warmth to be maintained for longer periods without constant attention to the fire. These changes did not occur everywhere at the same time, and many communities continued living in simpler structures for long periods. Yet, across many regions of the world, the general direction of change became clear. Human sleep was moving away from the open landscape and into environments where temperature could be managed more deliberately. One of the most significant transformations occurred when buildings began to separate sleeping spaces from the larger shared rooms of a house. Instead of gathering and resting within the same open area around a central hearth, some homes gradually developed separate rooms where people slept. These rooms could retain warmth from the main living area while also providing a quieter space for rest. The walls that enclosed them reduced the movement of air, and the presence of coverings, furniture, and stored materials helped hold warmth within the space. Although these rooms still followed the broader climate outside the building, the immediate environment around the sleeper became more stable than in earlier periods. The sleeping body was now surrounded by layers of architecture that slowed the loss of heat through the night. Another change involved the materials used for bedding and coverings. Over time, humans developed thicker woven textiles, layered blankets, and more refined ways of preparing animal skins and fibers. These materials trapped larger volumes of air around the body, improving their ability to retain warmth. The sleeper resting beneath these coverings experienced a small insulated space where body heat accumulated more effectively than before. Combined with enclosed rooms and improved building materials, these coverings further reduced the influence of the cooling night air. The sleeping environment became increasingly shaped by human design, rather than by the immediate conditions of the landscape. Even so, the transformation remained gradual for many centuries. Fire still needed to be tended, and warmth could fade if fuel ran out during the night. Buildings without modern insulation still allowed some movement of air, and cold weather could influence indoor conditions during certain seasons. The difference was that humans were beginning to shape their nighttime environment in ways that earlier generations could not. Instead of simply adapting to the cooling of the landscape, people were slowly learning to hold warmth within the spaces where they slept. This shift represented a quiet reversal of the ancient pattern. For most of human history, sleep occurred within environments that followed the natural cooling of night after sunset. With the development of more advanced buildings, improved bedding, and evolving heating practices, the sleeping space began to resist that cooling more effectively. The body that once rested within the full rhythm of the night now lay within rooms that held warmth longer than the outside world. The landscape still cooled beyond the walls, but inside the house the change arrived more slowly, softened by layers of materials and structures built over many generations of human ingenuity. As the ability to hold warmth indoors improved, another change followed quietly behind it. People began to expect sleep to occur in a more stable thermal environment. For earlier humans, the cooling of night was not a failure of the sleeping space. It was part of the world itself. The body lay down knowing that the air would likely grow cooler, that the fire might fade, and that warmth would need to be shared, conserved, or renewed. But as houses became better at trapping heat and bedding became thicker and more reliable, the experience of night slowly changed. Sleep no longer unfolded as directly inside the same temperature rhythm that shaped the open landscape. Instead, the sleeping body began spending more of the night inside an environment where change was softened, delayed, or partly resisted. This was a profound shift, not because the body itself suddenly changed, but because the world around the body did. The old human pattern had been to rest while the land lost heat after sunset. The newer pattern was to create a space that could hold warmth, even while the land outside continued cooling. That difference may seem ordinary now, yet across the larger timescale of human history it is remarkably recent. As indoor environments became more protected, the signals that shaped the feeling of night also became less direct. The skin no longer encountered the same steady movement of cooler air. The ground beneath the sleeper was no longer bare soil or stone, slowly giving up the day's heat to the sky. Thick bedding, raised beds, layered floors, enclosed rooms, and more dependable heating all created distance between the human body and the natural thermal cycle outside. This did not mean that modern or later historical sleepers became fully separate from biology. The body still continued its internal nightly rhythm, lowering its temperature as sleep began and reaching cooler points later in the night. But now that internal rhythm was increasingly taking place inside surroundings that did not mirror the outside landscape as closely as before. In older sleeping environments, body and world often cooled together. In newer ones, the body continued its ancient pattern, while the room around it became steadier, warmer, and more controlled. This gradual separation changed what felt normal. A cool room that might once have been ordinary could begin to feel uncomfortable or incomplete once warmth became easier to preserve indoors. Over time, thermal comfort itself became part of domestic life. Warmth during sleep was no longer only something borrowed from fire, bodies, and temporary coverings. It became something built into the room. This did not happen instantly or equally in all places. Many households for much of history still lived with drafts, fading fires, cold floors, and winter air entering through cracks or openings. Yet the long direction of change remained clear. Human sleep was moving towards spaces that no longer surrendered so easily to the cooling rhythm of night. This shift also changed the meaning of vulnerability after sunset. In earlier environments, the body had to negotiate the night directly, balancing heat loss with coverings, posture, companionship, and embers. In later environments, more of that work was transferred into architecture and household technology. Walls took on part of the task. Bedding took on part of the task. Heating systems eventually took on even more. The result was not merely greater comfort. It was a reversal of the ancient condition in which sleep occurred inside a slowly cooling world. Now, the world outside could cool while the sleeper remained surrounded by stored or renewed warmth. In that sense, modern comfort did not simply improve an old pattern. It replaced it. The ancient human body still enters sleep through rhythms shaped across deep time, but it now does so in rooms that often no longer resemble the thermal world in which those rhythms first evolved. When warmth became easier to maintain indoors, the relationship between human sleep and the natural night shifted in a subtle but lasting way. Earlier generations had rested in spaces where the temperature of the environment changed steadily after sunset. The body prepared for sleep while the land released its stored warmth, and the cooling air formed part of the background of rest. Over time, however, the places where people slept began to hold warmth longer than the landscape outside. Walls, floors, bedding, and heating gradually created environments where the night's cooling arrived more slowly or was partly prevented from reaching the sleeper at all. The body that lay down to rest now experienced a smaller change in temperature between evening and the early hours of morning. The ancient rhythm of the environment still existed beyond the walls, but inside the sleeping space the pattern had been softened. This transformation did not erase the biological rhythms that had developed over thousands of generations. The human body still lowers its internal temperature as sleep begins and moves through cycles of warmth and cooling across the night. These processes remain part of the body's internal timing system regardless of the temperature of the room. Yet the surroundings in which those rhythms unfold have changed dramatically compared with the environments in which human sleep first evolved. Instead of sharing the cooling of the landscape, the sleeper now often lies within a space that resists that change. The room holds warmth through insulation, stored heat, and modern systems that maintain steady conditions. In effect, the body continues following an ancient pattern, while the environment around it follows a newer one. This quiet difference highlights how recently human sleep has become separated from the natural thermal cycle of the planet. For most of human history, the environment played an active role in shaping how the body experienced night. The air cooled, the ground released heat, the fire faded, and people adjusted their coverings or sleeping positions as the hours passed. Sleep occurred within this moving environment rather than outside it. Only gradually did humans develop the ability to slow or resist those changes through architecture and technology. Even then, the shift unfolded unevenly across different societies and historical periods. Many people around the world continued living in houses where nighttime warmth depended heavily on fires, coverings, and the closeness of others. But the overall direction of change was clear. Human ingenuity was steadily transforming the sleeping space into an environment where temperature could be managed rather than simply endured. By the time modern heating systems and well-insulated buildings became common in many parts of the world, the transformation had reached a new stage. Bedrooms could remain warm and stable through the entire night, even when winter air outside grew cold. The sleeper no longer needed to rely on the fading warmth of embers or the shared heat of companions to remain comfortable. Instead, warmth flowed steadily through walls, floors, and radiators, or through other technologies designed to maintain a chosen temperature. In such environments, the ancient relationship between the cooling night and the sleeping body became less visible. The body continued to rest according to rhythms shaped in a much older world, yet the environment surrounding it had changed profoundly. The night outside might still follow its ancient pattern of releasing the heat of the day into the sky. Inside the room, however, the sleeper remained within a carefully maintained pocket of warmth, separated from the long natural rhythm that had once defined nearly every human night. When we step back and look across the long arc of human history, a quiet contrast begins to appear. The sleeping environments familiar to many people today, rooms with stable temperatures, thick bedding, and controlled heating, represent only a very small portion of the time our species has existed. For countless generations before such conditions became common, human sleep unfolded within landscapes that cooled gradually after sunset. People rested near fading fires, beneath coverings made from skins or fibers, close to the warmth of others, and often in shelters that softened the night without completely sealing it away. The air surrounding the body slowly lost the warmth of the day, and the ground beneath released its stored heat toward the sky. Within that changing environment, humans found ways to rest by balancing the warmth they could create with the cooling that naturally followed darkness. This long history does not mean that people in the past lived constantly in harsh cold. Many nights were mild, especially in warmer climates, and the strategies humans developed, fire, shelter, coverings, and shared warmth, often made rest comfortable enough for sleep. Yet the broader pattern remained different from the one experienced in many modern homes. The environment in which the body slept was rarely held at a fixed temperature throughout the entire night. Instead, it moved slowly through a natural rhythm shaped by the rising and setting of the sun. When we imagine the deep past of human life, it can be helpful to remember that sleep developed within this rhythm rather than outside it. The human body learned to rest while the surrounding world changed gradually from evening warmth to the cooler hours before dawn. Over thousands of generations, this pattern formed the background conditions in which human sleep became part of daily life. Modern technology has altered that relationship in ways that earlier generations could scarcely have imagined. Today, many people can close a door, adjust a thermostat, and create a sleeping environment that remains almost unchanged from the moment they lie down until the moment they wake. The cooling of night still occurs outside the walls, but it no longer shapes the sleeping space in the same direct way. Heating systems maintain steady warmth. Insulation slows the movement of air, and thick bedding traps the heat produced by the body. The sleeper rests inside a carefully managed environment that holds warmth regardless of what the night outside is doing. When we compare these two worlds, the long past of human sleep and the more controlled environments of the present, we see not a sudden break, but a gradual transformation. Each small development in shelter, bedding, and heating slowly moved human sleep farther from the natural thermal cycle of the landscape, yet the body itself remains much the same as it was in those earlier environments. It still follows internal rhythms of temperature and rest that formed across deep time. In that sense, every modern sleeper carries within them a history that stretches back to nights when warmth came from firelight, coverings, and the quiet presence of others nearby. Understanding this long story does not mean rejecting the comfort created by modern homes. Instead, it reminds us that the warmth we experience during sleep today is part of a remarkable human achievement. It reflects centuries of learning how to build spaces that protect the body from the cooling of night. Behind the steady warmth of a modern bedroom lies a long journey through open landscapes, shared fires, and countless nights spent resting within a world that slowly released the heat of the day. Seen from this wider perspective, warmth during sleep begins to look less like a permanent feature of human life and more like a carefully built achievement. For most of the long journey of our species, warmth at night had to be created and protected each evening. People gathered materials, tended fires, arranged sleeping places, and rested close to one another in order to hold a small amount of warmth against the cooling air. The body's heat, the glow of embers, the shelter of walls or stone, and the softness of coverings all worked together to form a fragile balance. None of these elements alone could completely stop the night from becoming cooler. Instead, they combined to slow the loss of warmth long enough for sleep to take place. Across thousands of generations, human communities repeated this quiet work every evening. The warmth of sleep was therefore something renewed each night, rather than something permanently stored within the environment. When modern buildings and heating systems eventually made warmth easier to maintain, this nightly effort gradually faded from everyday awareness. Today, many people experience warmth during sleep as something constant and dependable. A room remains comfortable through the entire night, even as the air outside continues its natural cooling. Yet the body resting inside that room is still shaped by a much older history. The rhythms that guide sleep when the body grows tired, how it releases heat as night begins, and how it moves through cycles of rest until morning emerged long before rooms could hold warmth so easily. Those rhythms formed in landscapes where darkness carried the slow fading of the day's heat. In that earlier world, people did not simply ignore the cooling of night. They lived within it and learned to work alongside it. Fires were placed where their warmth could reach several sleepers at once. Skins and woven fibers were layered to trap the body's heat. Sleeping groups arranged themselves so that warmth moved gently between bodies beneath shared coverings. These practices did not eliminate the presence of night, but helped human communities remain comfortable enough to rest within it. The knowledge behind such practices was passed quietly across generations through observation and experience. Over time, it became part of the practical understanding of how to live in a world where the sun was still the primary source of warmth. The shift toward modern sleeping environments therefore represents more than a change in comfort. It reflects a long accumulation of human knowledge about how to shape surroundings in ways that protect the body. Architecture, bedding, and heating systems gradually took over tasks that were once handled through shared effort each night. The room itself now performs much of the work that people once did through fire, coverings, and closeness to one another. Even so, the ancient relationship between the body and the night has not disappeared entirely. Outside the walls of any house, the land still cools after sunset, just as it has for millions of years. The ground releases the heat it gathered during the day, and the air drifts slowly toward the colder hours before dawn. Inside modern rooms, that process may go unnoticed, but it continues beyond the boundaries of human shelter. When we understand this long background, the warmth of a modern sleeping space can be seen not as an ordinary condition, but as a remarkable human creation. One built gradually across generations that once rested beside fading fires while the world around them quietly grew, cooler. If we follow the long path of human history backward through time, the meaning of a warm night begins to change. In the modern world, warmth during sleep often feels ordinary. It is part of the background of daily life, something provided quietly by walls, blankets, and heating systems that continue working through the night. Yet when we look across the far deeper history of our species, we see that this comfort is the result of a long and patient process. For most human lives that have ever existed, sleep took place in a world where warmth could never be fully guaranteed. Darkness arrived, the sun's energy faded from the land, and the air gradually cooled. People responded not by escaping that process, but by learning how to live within it. Fires were tended carefully. Sleeping places were arranged close to warmth and shelter. Coverings were gathered from plants and animals. Bodies rested beside one another so that heat could be shared. Each of these actions formed part of a quiet partnership between human knowledge and the natural world. The cooling of night remained real, but people learned how to soften it through cooperation, skill, and attention to the environment around them. Over thousands of years, that knowledge slowly accumulated, Each generation added small improvements, better shelters, thicker coverings, more effective ways of holding warmth within a space. Eventually, those small steps led to buildings capable of protecting sleepers from the full cooling of the night. Today, many people close their doors at night and sleep in rooms where the temperature changes very little until morning. The ancient rhythm of the cooling landscape continues outside, but inside the walls the sleeper remains wrapped in a steady warmth created by centuries of human ingenuity. Seen from the perspective of deep time, this modern comfort is not the starting point of human life, but one of its most recent achievements. The human body lying beneath blankets tonight carries a history that stretches back to nights beside embers and open skies. That history reminds us that warmth during sleep was once something fragile and carefully protected. It depended on shared effort, on attention to fire and shelter, and on the quiet closeness of other people resting through the same darkness. Understanding this past does not mean abandoning the comfort that modern life provides. Instead, it offers a different way of seeing it. The warmth of a bedroom is not simply a convenience. It is the final step in a long story of learning how to live with the rhythms of the earth. For most of human history, night slowly carried away the heat of the day, and people rested within that cooling world while waiting for the sun to return. Even now, beyond the walls of every house, that ancient cycle continues exactly as it always has. The land still releases its warmth after sunset. The air still drifts toward the colder hours before dawn. The question that quietly remains is not whether the night will cool, because it always will. The deeper question is this: after so many generations learning how to live with the cooling night, what does it mean that we can now sleep almost without noticing it at all?